It was a real shock, because, you know, he was a neighbour.
It was a real inner feeling, we've got to solve this for this young kid here.
Obviously an evil man. I would find it hard to forgive him.
In our minds, there was more to tell. This couldn't be the first time that he'd done this.
On Sunday, November the 26th, 2000, a worried mother called the police, telling them that her daughter hadn't come home after Christmas shopping. When initial inquiries proved fruitless, West Yorkshire Police launched Operation Conifer, one of the largest missing persons investigations in their history. Despite all their efforts, it was 9 excruciating months before they found out what had happened to her. Bramley in West Yorkshire is a suburb of the city of Leeds. Once a picturesque village with a rich industrial past, it was redeveloped into the Bramley of today, but it has retained its strong sense of community.
People do gather, look after one another, so to speak, and like to see one another and have a chat.
Everybody knows everybody. They are pretty friendly. You know, personally, I don't know any nasty person that lives in Bramley as a community.
At 7 p.m. on Sunday, the 26th of November 2000, West Yorkshire Police received a phone call from a Sharon Hawkshead, reporting her 16-year-old daughter, Leanne Tiernan, missing.
Her mother gave us a description, and that was of a 16-year-old girl, slightly built. She was under 7 stones, with long brown hair, light brown hair.
Police immediately got to work interviewing family and friends to piece together her movements that day.
She waved goodbye to her family and set off on the short bus ride into Leeds with her best friend, Sarah, to buy some Christmas presents. Leanne bought Sarah some jewellery for Christmas, and she put those in her pocket, and they caught the bus back then from the city centre back to their home at Bramley. Leanne got off the bus with Sarah at Sarah's stop, which was 2 or 3 stops before where Leanne would have ordinarily got off. But Leanne, being the kind of girl she was, she wanted to make sure Sarah got home safely. And by waving Sarah off where she did, near to Sarah's home, that meant that as she entered the darkness of Huffley Gill.
By this time, it was 5 p.m. Huffley Gill was a secluded, tree-covered ravine with a path at the bottom. It was no place for a young girl on her own, even one in a hurry to get home.
It would have taken Leanne probably about 20 minutes to walk from that point to get home. It was just over half a mile, between half a mile and 3/4 of a mile.
At 5:30, Sarah rang Leanne's home, but Leanne wasn't there. Mum Sharon was concerned, but when she found out what route her daughter had taken, concern soon turned to alarm.
She realised that she'd walked through Huffley Gill, which is pitch black at that time of day, even though it was only 5 o'clock. Leanne's mum started ringing Leanne's phone frantically. It rang for about 20 times and just rang off. She rang it again. It rang for 4 times and then was seemingly cut off. Panic started to set in from that point on. And after a quick search round the Gill by family and Sarah and friends, the alarm was raised and Leanne was reported missing.
It was now 7 p.m, and Leanne had only been missing a few hours, but police knew time was of the essence. The case was assigned to Chris Gregg, who was a detective superintendent at that time.
From the outset, when Leanne was reported missing, you hope that there's just going to be an innocent explanation, that she'll return, she's gone off to her friends, or there's a secret boyfriend that Mum and Dad don't know about.
Police started searching immediately, and it soon became clear just how massive the task facing them was.
That area is quite a dense urban area, a lot of areas to search. There's an area with lots of housing, commercial premises, there's a river, there's a canal, There are drainage shafts. There are a whole range of search areas that had to be considered.
The next morning, with Leanne now missing for 12 hours, Operation Conifer was launched. The hunt for Leanne was on.
And it was important that we literally, to use the cliche, left no stone unturned. And the search teams went through here, searching the whole area for anything as small as the small items of jewellery that we knew Leanne had bought that day for a friend, looking for the mobile phone, an umbrella, any telltale sign which could help us explain what had happened to Leanne.
It wasn't long before everyone in the community heard the news.
It did make people more cautious. There was lots of different rumours going round, you know, but nobody really knew anything.
It was clear that an early forensic response would be needed, so DSI Greg called in the Forensic Science Service, or FSS.
Well, we became involved in the Leanne Tiernan case almost from the outset, once she had gone missing. For reference purposes, if she was found or if an offender came to light, we needed to know her DNA profile and we needed to get her fingerprints. So we actually took her toothbrush and got a DNA profile from that and matched that in with profiles from her parents. And we were also able to obtain her fingerprints from her diary.
After 5 days, the search was still coming up empty-handed, despite the police's best efforts.
The scale of the search to find Leanne was huge. It was one of the biggest search operations the force had ever undertaken. It involved 200 officers, specialist search advisors. It involved the dog section, the mounted section, the underwater search teams.
Peter Grant and his forensic team did what they could under trying circumstances.
The difficulty we faced was that there was no clear scene for us to focus on. You know, there was the last sighting on the bus, and she was also intending to walk all the way home, and the scene could have been anywhere between those 2 points, which was quite a large area. Because a lot of areas were being searched, a lot of items started coming in, but they weren't ones that ended up being relevant to the case.
Getting nowhere, on the 3rd of December, 1 week after Leanne Tiernan had last been seen, the police turned to the media for help.
We staged the reconstruction and they followed the same route, right to the point where Leanne had been last seen. Now, what struck me when we were doing the reconstruction, which was how black Huffley Gill was, I was just staggered at the vulnerable position she was putting herself in when she entered that gill.
Once aired, the response was immediate.
Following the reconstruction, we were starting to piece together some interesting sightings that people were telling us about and sounds that people had heard, and 2 were of interest to us. One was a lady who said that in the weeks leading up to Leanne's disappearance, she'd seen a man, a rough-looking guy, with a dog, hanging around the entrance to Huffley Gill. And she was a little bit uneasy about this guy because he was trying to engage the children into conversation, the school children.
Straight away, the police got the witness to describe the man she'd seen, to produce an image.
Another lady remembered hearing a scream around the time that we know Leanne would have just about entered the gill. And that, again, it might have been connected, it might not, but these 2 pieces of information were important to us.
On December the 4th, police published the EFIT.
We were looking at people in that area who walked through the gill with dogs, and we questioned and found lots of them. We eliminated them all.
With the search still in full swing, officers found out everything they could about the schoolgirl they were looking for.
Leanne was a typical 16-year-old girl who was a lot to live for. She had this radiant smile. She would do anything for anybody. She looked after her grandma, went to church with her, even though she wasn't particularly keen on going to church every Sunday morning, but she did it for her grandma's sake. She'd been in the Brownies, went into the Girl Guides, and she had a group of friends, very popular girl.
Sister Janet Durbin was the minister at the Methodist chapel where the family worshipped.
Leanne did stand out because she was always bright and shiny, always helpful, and she used to like to carry the flag for the brownies and the guides. And as she grew older, we started a Saturday night fellowship for the teenagers, and she used to be one that asked a lot of questions. We talked about all kinds of things that were going on in the world, and she was always up with a hand up and helping. And then Leanne used to like helping in the kitchen, preparing the pizzas and chips and things. She's just a normal young girl.
After 3 weeks, there were still no useful clues, yet police kept on going.
All the time, you're racking your brains. Where is she? What can have happened to her? We've searched 1,100 houses. We've searched drainage shafts, wells, railway lines, canal. We even lowered the canal, almost pulled the plug out and drained it down because it was easier and quicker to search it that way over 3 miles. And we still hadn't found her.
Over the next few months, police continued searching and questioning people of interest. But it was as if Leanne had disappeared into thin air.
The feeling and the belief that they will still be found safe and well never goes away. And I'm sure that is the case with anybody who's facing that particular situation of a young loved one particularly who's disappeared, that they'll be found ultimately. And personally and professionally, you know that the chances of being found safe and well are slim.
By July, Operation Conifer was in its 8th month, and although the physical searching had all but ended, the police hadn't stopped looking.
The network across the UK was fairly extensive that Leanne was missing, and we were getting calls periodically that a body had been found, and we were checking out. We got Leanne's DNA, so we could quickly eliminate anyone who had been found during that intervening period while she was missing.
On August 20th, 2001, almost 9 months after Leanne's disappearance, DSI Greg received some news that changed the investigation completely. Almost 9 months had gone by without a single clue as to where missing 16-year-old schoolgirl Leanne Tiernan from Brownlee in Yorkshire had gone. The longer Leanne remained missing, the more the police suspected the worst. Then police got a call that was to change everything.
A dog walker was in the woods and saw what he thought was a bundle of rubbish that somebody had dumped. And he went over to the bundle and realised that it wasn't rubbish. There was something which he thought was a dead animal in the bags. And he gingerly opened the duvet cover and saw that there was some plastic sacks tied with twine at the top. And he broke into one of the bags and realised this wasn't a dead animal, it was a dead person.
Over the months, police had found dozens of bodies around the country that hadn't been Leanne.
But this one immediately felt different. It wasn't far from where Leanne had been last seen, only 16 miles. The body had been left in a shallow grave, and this just had all the hallmarks of somebody trying to dispose of a body quickly.
Immediately, the scene was meticulously searched.
So when our forensic team started uncovering this, it was found that the girl's body had been encased in 10 plastic bags and had been encased top and tail. So the first bag had been used to put the girl's body in, tied at the top with twine, and then a bag put the opposite direction, tied with twine. And the final bag had been secured around the girl's neck with an 18-inch leather dog collar with a buckle. That parcel had then been put into the duvet cover, and the duvet cover had been used to carry that parcel into the woods. Capturing evidence from this point onwards was going to be crucial for what seemed as though a major crime had been committed.
The decision was made to then retrieve that package intact and take it back to the pathology where it could be thoroughly examined and forensic samples taken, hopefully.
Having examined the crime scene, a profile of the perpetrator began to emerge.
I think the state of the body, particularly the use of ties and the later wrapping and marks of injury, did suggest that the perpetrator had approached this in a coldly efficient, ruthless kind of way.
The packaged body of the unknown girl was taken to the nearest mortuary at Harrogate. DSI Gregg followed soon after.
Living and breathing a case like this for months, I knew this girl. I knew everything about this girl. And the worst possible outcome was that she was now on this table in front of me. And I knew it was her from the moment I looked at her. And I've never had a feeling like it before or since. And there was just something at that moment in time that was so powerful, an emotion, that it was a real inner feeling, we've got to solve this for this young kid here.
Once the bags were opened, evidence was found that would prove key in identifying the killer.
When we found her, she had got her hands tied behind her back with 3 cable ties. And there were 2 black cable ties and a yellow one. The black one was around one wrist, the yellow one around her other wrist, and they were connected between the 2 with another black cable tie, like a daisy chain, in effect, and her hands tied behind her back. She'd been strangled with 2 ligatures. One was a dark woolen scarf with a red stripe running through it. And the other was a clear-coloured cable tie that was around her neck and pulled very tightly.
The pathologist was joined by one of Peter Grant's team.
It was very important that we had a forensic scientist at the scene, and she'd actually identified a tuft of fibre on the back of the jumper.
Although DSI Gregg felt certain the body was that of Leanne, a formal identification had to occur.
We already had her fingerprints that we'd taken from her diary, and we were actually able to compare those with the fingerprints on the diary and get a formal identification that this was Leanne Tiernan.
After months of hoping and praying for Leanne's safe return, it was time to tell the family.
The news that they'd been dreading and fearing for 9 months was now suddenly upon them. And I've nothing but admiration for the stoicism, the absolute dignity that Mum and Dad showed at that moment in time.
DSI Gregg was more determined than ever to hunt down Leanne's killer. Back at the mortuary, Peter Grant's team called in an expert in insects, known as an entomologist.
Within the forensic world, we use entomologists to assist with time of death. When someone dies and they're left outside, there is a clearly defined pattern of insects being attracted to the body, and they'll lay their eggs on the body. And the state at which those insects are present can give an indication of how long the body has been dead.
The entomologist quickly made a pivotal discovery.
He was identifying insects that wouldn't normally turn up until a few weeks after a body has started decomposing. They tend to turn up, certain insects come first, then others, then others. He was getting some of the later insects. Maybe this body had been frozen, in that when you have a frozen piece of food and you defrost it, it tends to go off quicker. And there's a similar process happening here.
Investigators believe Leanne could only have been buried where she was found for 1 week, meaning she'd been kept somewhere else the rest of the time. The big question was, where?
This was as sinister as it gets. A young girl clearly been kidnapped. Where, we still believed it was in that Hufley Gill area. But had been kidnapped, taken somewhere. Was it in the area she was now disposed of, or was it nearer to Bramley? These were all investigative considerations which we were still to find the answer to. For us as the investigation team, there were some really good forensic opportunities here, and we weren't going to let those opportunities go.
Leanne had been missing for more than 6 months, but the police never gave up trying to find her. And then when her body was discovered after 9 months, the missing persons case turned into the hunt for her depraved killer, who police and the Forensic Science Service team were determined to bring to justice.
With the suggestion that Leanne had been frozen or stored somewhere, it became important to, we wanted to know where that was, and I'd established on previous cases that one way of doing this was to look at nasal washings from bodies, because this gives you an idea of where people took their last breath, in effect.
Immediately, pollen expert Dr. Patricia Wiltshire was contacted.
I was called in to get pollen from her to see if I could envisage the sort of place that she had been. Now, we know she'd been buried in this woodland, but had she been anywhere else? Had she been kept anywhere else before she'd been put in the woodland?
Palynology, or the study of plant pollen and spores, was a tool police used quite often.
You've got pollen and spores in the environment, in a sort of mixture. And if someone goes along and picks them up, they will have certain mixtures of pollen, different amounts of different types of pollen, different types of spores on them. And then I know where these plants live and function, so I can envisage a sort of place they've come from. And if I do that, it helps the police find places.
Dr. Wiltshire went to the mortuary in Harrogate.
I irrigated her nasal passages because sometimes people breathe in pollen very deeply up into the nasal passages, right up into the top of the nose. So I irrigated those out, and I also washed her hair very carefully. And from those washings, I was able to get assemblages of pollen grains and spores that her hair had picked up. Later, I worked on the duvet cover, and what I found on the duvet cover matched up with what I found in the ant's hair. And I had pollen, plant spores, I got fungal spores. I also got the conducting elements in wood, of conifers and of flowering trees, woody plants. And they were charred. There was a lot of microscopic charred material. And I assumed, therefore, that she'd been in contact with something that had been burnt. It seemed like a bonfire because there was hardwood and softwood.
Armed with this information, Dr. Wiltshire began envisioning the sort of place Leanne had been to pick up these materials.
I said to the police that I thought it was a very neglected and downtrodden garden, that it had a bonfire in it. And I was also able to say that there was a privet hedge. There was probably either a plum or a damson tree close by. And also, the ground area was very, very neglected, with brambles and all sorts of plants that are weeds, really.
With Dr. Wiltshire's incredible insight, police just needed to find a suspect with a garden that matched. Unfortunately, not all the forensics was going their way.
Leanne's body, with the decomposition, had completely obliterated the potential for DNA and fingerprints on the items that she was encased in. But there were other opportunities that we considered really, really significant.
One of these was the duvet.
Unfortunately, although we did find some body fluids on this duvet, we weren't able to get any sort of DNA result, which was a major disappointment, I think, down partly to the condition of the body. Then we had to fall back on some other types of evidence from the duvet, and we noticed on there that there are a lot of animal hairs that look like dog hairs, all of a relatively similar colour and appearance, suggesting it all come from one dog.
The lack of DNA was a major concern.
We realised we had to fall back on some more traditional forensic methods and maybe build up a forensic picture that we could then use as an intelligence tool to identify an offender.
Detective Superintendent Gregg and his team went back to basics, hoping that something would point them in the direction of Leanne's killer.
The physical items which she was bound with, the cable ties, who'd manufactured them? Where were they being distributed or sold these? Who had possession of them and for what purpose? There was a yellow one, 2 black ones, and the one that had been used as a ligature, the neutral coloured ones. What's the provenance of these? We don't know until we start drilling down and finding out.
While the police got on with discovering where the cable ties and dog collar came from, Peter Grant and his team continued putting together their forensic picture.
We built up a jigsaw, if you like, of different pieces of forensic evidence. We had the twine, we had fibres, we had dog hair.
The items themselves mean nothing. It's only when you start finding out the backstory to the items that suddenly they become relevant. The fibre that was found on Leanne's back, we found out that that was a carpet fibre. And we got experts in Bradford, which is in the textile heart of the north, to help us with this. And they gave us the type of carpet that had very likely come from.
All of this forensic evidence needed a suspect to be of use. Then the dog hair on the duvet grabbed the team's attention.
From the dog hair point of view, although we could tell it was dog hair, we did notice that some of these hairs had quite decent roots, that if it was a human hair, we'd think, well, we could DNA test that.
The problem was no one had ever DNA tested dog hair in the UK. Then Peter Grant made an interesting discovery.
I found out that at that time there was a university in America that had actually established a method to carry out DNA testing on dog hair, so that was our next port of call, with a view to potentially doing some sort of dog mass screen DNA.
If it came off, it could be the break police needed. And that wasn't all. Information about the cable ties used to bound and strangle Leanne had been unearthed.
We found out where they were all manufactured, and 3 of them seemingly took us nowhere. But one of them, we thought this could be interesting. It was the yellow cable tie, manufactured by a UK company, and millions made. And so you think, seemingly, this is going to take us nowhere. But what was interesting about this, as opposed to the others, was that 90% of these were used by the Royal Mail. Could this be somebody who's got connections with the Royal Mail? Maybe, maybe not.
The twine used to tie up the plastic bags also had a story to tell.
It was a unique twine that had been put together from a forensic perspective, was absolutely terrific. You know, because you knew that if you could find more of that twine, you were going to match it up.
The team's momentum continued.
The leather dog collar around her neck. We looked at this dog collar, manufactured in Nottingham. And it was a dog collar that many millions were sold worldwide. So we knew it was a long shot, and we worked out there were X number of pet shops in Leeds that sold these dog collars. We went to every pet shop. We asked them the question, we got nowhere.
While DSI Gregg's team chased long shots, Peter Grant had gone to America with the dog hair to extract its DNA.
After a couple of days working with them, we were actually able to identify that they had a reasonable method and that this was worth a go, and we carried out the test on 2 of our dog hairs, and we did obtain a decent dog DNA profile.
Now police could organise the UK's first mass dog screening in the hope of identifying Leanne's killer. Unaware of this result, police in West Yorkshire were looking at the 120 dog collar wholesalers in the UK.
113 were checked, and the detective got the answer back each time saying, no, no, no. Pet shop, pet shop, pet shop. We supplied her. Company 114, based in Liverpool, gave an answer that the detective wasn't expecting, which was, yes, we do sell those dog collars, and yes, we do have a customer, a private customer in Leeds who bought one. In fact, bought 6 and paid for it on a credit card.
This was the moment DSI Greg and his team had been praying for.
And have you got the name of that customer? Yes. It's a Mr. J. Taylor at Armley, Leeds. Thank you very much.
With that, 10 months after her disappearance, the investigation into the sickening murder of Leanne Tiernan finally had a suspect. The investigation into what was now the brutal murder of 16-year-old schoolgirl Leanne Tiernan from Bramley in Yorkshire finally had the breakthrough police had been looking for. The dog collar found around Leanne's neck had led police to a John Taylor from Leeds.
We found out he worked for a company called Parcel Force, which is part of the Royal Mail. He was living at home on his own in the adjoining township of Armley, which is adjacent to Bramley. He'd been divorced for 4 years, had some children, but they didn't live with him. He'd never been in trouble with the police. People knew him as John the Pet Man. He seemingly kept himself to himself, but we quickly found out that he had a bit of a nocturnal life as a poacher, liked to go out poaching.
The connection between the dog collar and ready access to Royal Mail cable ties was too much to ignore. On the 16th of October 2001, almost 10 months after Leanne's disappearance, police made their move and arrested John Taylor.
Of course, he denied any connection with Leanne, or having done anything wrong, and was denying that he'd had certain pets or animals because we were interested in pets that he'd had with our animal DNA that we were also trying to link.
News of the arrest soon travelled around the area.
It was a real shock because, you know, he was a neighbour. You know, you said hello to him. He used to sell pet food, and my kids used to go over to his house to buy pet food for the rabbits. And it was just a real shock.
John Taylor was taken for questioning, and the Forensic Science Services team methodically searched his house.
The immediate thing that struck us was that there were no carpets in the house. It's just bare floorboards everywhere. But it did appear that, certainly in some rooms, that he'd only recently taken up the carpets. And we actually identified that some of the tufts of carpet still clinging onto nails in the corners of rooms were actually the same red fibres we'd found adhering to Leanne's jumper.
The evidence police needed kept on coming.
The black cable tie that had been used to bind Leanne's hands, we found some broken ones on the fence in the garden outside, exactly the same manufacture and code. We found 2 more dog collars in the house that was still there, that matched the same dog collar that had led us to John Taylor's door in the first place.
Also during the search, there was some rabbit netting found. John Taylor was quite into trapping animals. And the makeup of the twine used to make this rabbit netting was exactly the same as the twine that had been used to tie the green bags.
So all the critical items that to him were so insignificant, suddenly were now coming back to haunt him.
With all this damning evidence mounting up, the forensic team called in Dr. Wiltshire.
I travelled up to Yorkshire, went into the garden, and it was amazing. The garden was so much like I'd envisaged. I just couldn't believe it. But there were 2 bonfires. There were the remains of 2 bonfires. But the elements that I found in Leanne's hair and on the duvet were on the left-hand side of the garden. Also, to approach that area, you had to go under a sort of archway, and there was a big, it was either a plum or a damson. There were no flowers on it, no fruits, but I knew it was a plum or a damson. And of course, I'd found that pollen. I'd found the plum and damson pollen. I'd found all these plants that were in the hedge and around, and all these weeds on the ground. I'd found the remnants of a bonfire in a hair, and I could say, it's on the left-hand side of the garden, not the right-hand side. And it just all came to life for me at that minute.
Dr. Wilshire's accuracy was astonishing. At the police station, Taylor continued to be interviewed.
Faced with this overwhelming evidence, which we now had against him, he said he admitted he'd killed her, but tried to claim it was an accident.
John Taylor then gave his version of events.
He had gone to Huffley Gill that Sunday afternoon with his dog to take the dog for a walk when he saw a young girl walking down the path. He grabbed the girl, told her not to scream. He had a scarf which he tied around her eyes as a blindfold, took his coat off and put it on the girl and pulled the hood up.
Incredibly, at approximately 5 p.m. on Sunday, the 26th of November, John Taylor then walked a terrified Leanne Tiernan the 22 minutes back to his house through an estate and even over a busy road.
She was now in the clutches of this predator.
Once at his house, he took her upstairs and tied her hands with cable ties.
She kicked out at him, and he grabbed her, and he says she fell on the floor and banged her head, and there was blood all over the place. And that's how she died.
It was a story that contradicted the evidence.
Now, he had a problem explaining how Leanne hadn't died from a head injury. She'd died from strangulation. The cable tie that was used to kill her had been pulled to such an extent, so tight it was only 10 centimetres in diameter. He hadn't killed her by accident. He'd strangled her.
John Taylor was doing his best to avoid a murder charge, but DSI Greg wasn't about to let that happen.
We put an identity parade together, and the lady who'd seen the man with the dog hanging around, talking to children, who she was uneasy about, picked him out.
The identification was a persuasive argument for the police's case that this had been a well-planned crime. But there was one crucial bit of evidence missing.
One of the more grim aspects of the scene was that a dog was buried in the garden. And this was a dog that had essentially been hit over the head with a shovel, it appeared. And unfortunately, the dog was in such, again, advanced state of decay that it wasn't suitable for us to DNA test, so we just decided not to pursue that line in the end.
It was a blow that, despite all the effort, the dog DNA was unusable. Officers carried on questioning Taylor.
He denied freezing Leanne's body, but we know it was frozen through the medical evidence. What his story was that after he'd killed her, he didn't know what to do with her body. So to start with, he took it into the back garden and put Leanne's body under a lot of pallets and tried to hide it that way until he could think what to do with her.
Police knew for certain that Leanne had been frozen. They just didn't know why.
Maybe he considered it wiser to actually keep the body inside his house than to put it in the landscape that was currently undergoing a very thorough search.
Another theory was that John Taylor kept Leanne frozen as a morbid trophy he could continually revisit for his grotesque pleasure. Next, he claimed he took her to Lindley Wood just days after killing her.
We know that Leanne's body had only been in the woods for a maximum of a week, and there was a witness who saw a man a week before the body was found lifting a bundle out of the boot of a car that matched John Taylor's description, that matched the description of his car, taking it into the woods.
John Taylor was charged, and then on the 8th of July 2002, over 18 months after 16-year-old Leanne Tiernan went missing, he stood trial at Leeds Crown Court for her kidnap and murder. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, he changed his plea.
Taylor had been trying to minimise his part in Leanne's death, claiming it was an accident, an unfortunate accident. But right at the end, he knew he had to face the prosecution case.
It was a great relief to the family not having to go through a whole trial, and he was convicted.
He was described as a sadistic sexual predator by the judge, told he would never be released from prison. That changed, of course, with the new Sentencing Act. He was sentenced to 30 years. But that's the calibre of this individual. He's a killer, shows no remorse. Not once would he have had any compassion for this young girl in his clutches, only what he wanted to do with her.
The local community welcomed the news.
I think there was a sense of relief after it had all come to a head, that somebody had been prosecuted for this crime. But I don't think an area can ever go back to the same again, because you're always wary of other things that might happen.
I would find it hard to forgive him, although we have to forgive him. Obviously an evil man. He'd planned to get somebody, and Leanne just happened to be there. And a cruel man. All the dead animals that he'd just battered to death. I can't understand him.
After 12 months of frustration and dead ends, Leanne's killer had finally been brought to justice.
The case that was built by the whole team was one that there was no wriggle room for John Taylor whatsoever. And I think that's just testament to the professional and thorough job that everyone on this case did.
You don't often witness where killers of this propensity and cruelty are, here in front of you, being sentenced, and the words poured on them from the bench. But whilst it did bring to an end one part of the investigation into John Taylor, it wasn't the final chapter. Because in our minds, there was more to tell. This couldn't be the first time that he'd done this.
As a result of Leanne's murder inquiry, police reopened at least 10 cold case investigations looking at Taylor, convinced this wasn't a one-off. And less than a year after his conviction, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 separate rapes. The question is, what else was he guilty of?
Uncover more dark secrets that go on behind closed doors. Killer in My Village is weeknights at 11 on Sky Mix.
I remember working at the pub and started hearing rumours.
Mum, dad, 2 children slaughtered in their own home.
Massive shock to the local community that something so awful could happen to such a lovely family.
This was an all-out slaughter of 4 people.
No one really knew what had happened, how it had happened, or why it had happened.
Are the family involved in some way with organised crime? Is this a contract killing because it's so brutal?
A family wiped out and a man going missing leaves a community asking questions.
Detectives were left pondering, was this missing persons case linked to a quadruple murder case.
There was a point in this inquiry I was thinking if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all.
You didn't feel safe in the village?
Police were playing catch-up.
I can't think of another crime of this magnitude in the history of Northamptonshire Police.
In the beautiful Northampton countryside lies the quaint village of Wootton.
It's really lovely. Everyone knows everyone, so it's really chatty, really friendly. Yeah, it is nice, especially to have kids around here.
I love it. I know it's an old village. The church is very, very old, and we're in a conservation area, so people around here are very, very friendly. People have lived here for a long time. There are some families in the village who've been in the village a long, long time, so I think it says an awful lot. Very easygoing, yeah. Good community.
Wootton has a great community spirit. It has a lot of buildings, facilities, open space, considering it's an urban parish. There's the new building, Wootton Fields and Simpson Manor, and then there's the old village, which has got all its old traditional spirit with the church and the old village hall.
You've got the Yeoman of England pub in the village, Working Men's Club, you've got a community centre, they put on events, they do a food market every Saturday. Everyone helps each other out, everyone looks out for each other.
So Wootton was the perfect place for Jeff and Helen Ding, originally from East China, to raise their two daughters, Zing and Alice.
Jeff was a university lecturer up in Manchester, very educated man in the science field. Helen worked at the local school teaching languages. They had two daughters, Zing, also known as Nancy, and then they had a younger daughter, Alice, of whom Nancy was very protective.
Family life was busy, especially as Jeff split his week between home and his work at Manchester Metropolitan University.
I believe Jeff was a senior lecturer here, specialisms in polymers, so synthetic materials. His teaching was at first-year level. We all pride ourselves, giving support to our students, but Jeff really took that to a fantastic level. He spent most of his time with students, helping out with various problems that they might have with their studies, for instance. He was actually a hall warden in a halls of residence just on campus. I don't think I ever saw him once lose his temper or ever have any issues with staff. Very easy to get on with.
The Ding's eldest daughter, 18-year-old Zing, was an accomplished musician and preparing to go to university.
Zing came over as being very self-assured, very calm, very capable. She had a wicked sense of humour, and she was quite a live wire. But she managed to be friendly to everybody she met. She was good at everything. She was a remarkable student at school, and she'd already accepted a place at Nottingham University to study medicine.
Like her sister, 12-year-old Alice was also a keen musician.
Alice was quite bubbly. She had one of those smiles that would light up any room. A bit of a cheeky smile, but she was absolutely delightful. Very outgoing. You could tell she was the whole package as a violinist. I think both of the girls had a very strong work ethic, and no doubt that come down to them from their parents.
Both Jeff and Helen worked tirelessly to create a warm and inviting home for their daughters and their friends.
Really welcoming. You could literally turn up and they would invite you in for dinner. They were just such a good family. Like, you would want your kids to be friends with them because they were just the best.
They all seemed very happy and very settled. They loved that family home as well. That was a place they really liked to be. And it is a very nice neighbourhood, I have to say.
But this neighbourhood will never be the same after one fateful bank holiday in 2011.
It was a big holiday weekend. We'd had the royal wedding.
When William and Kate got married, the whole of the parish here was alive with street parties, Union flags everywhere, bunting, a lot of celebration. It was a super happy place.
I was actually working in the pub on the royal wedding. We opened early for it. Not many people actually came in because loads of people around the village were actually throwing street parties.
As the bank holiday weekend comes to a close, neighbours of the Ding family become concerned, as they haven't been seen all weekend.
One of the family was due to attend something and they didn't turn up. And then the neighbour went round to see if they were okay and see where they were. The house was in relative darkness, no reply at the front door. That neighbour, thankfully, was a little bit persistent and went round to the back of the house.
Peering through the kitchen window, the neighbour glimpses what appears to be a body on the floor.
The police are alerted and clearly force entry to the premises.
As the officers enter the house, they discover not one, but 2 bodies.
Jeff is slumped by a radiator in the kitchen with multiple stab wounds. Helen is by the entrance door between the hall and the kitchen, and she's got multiple stab wounds.
The officers head upstairs and step into a harrowing scene.
Alice and Zing were up in the bedroom. The 2 girls are on the bed and they've both received a number of fatal stab wounds. You know, it was pretty horrendous.
With 4 members of the same family dead, detectives' first instinct is that the culprit could be amongst the deceased.
Nobody knows the reason that this family have ended up dead. One possible scenario is, and it does happen, is the murder-suicide aspect, where a family member has, for whatever reason, killed the other family members and then taken their own life.
With such a heavy police presence, rumours quickly spread across the village.
I remember working at the pub at the time and started hearing rumours, customers coming in saying something really bad had happened, but we were all still unsure of the extent of what had happened.
I first heard through a friend who I live near locally, whose daughter was very good friends with one of the young ladies. So it was horrific locally to everybody. The fact that the family had been there for a while and been not discovered was horrific, and a massive shock to the local community that something so awful could happen to such a lovely family. I wouldn't like to speculate on people's opinions, but to me personally, it felt a bit targeted.
Little did the villagers of Wootton know the scale of the crime that's been committed on their doorstep.
The murder of the Ding family was probably one of the most horrendous crimes I've ever been asked to investigate.
In the village of Wootton, police have discovered a family of 4 dead. Detective Superintendent Glyn Timmins is put in charge of the investigation.
I was at home on Sunday the 1st of May, enjoying the bank holiday weekend, and my colleague alerted me to the fact that he'd been called to the scene of potentially a multiple murder scene.
46-year-olds Jeff and Helen Ding and their 2 daughters, 18-year-old Zing and 12-year-old Alice, have all suffered fatal knife wounds.
I think what you're trying to do initially is you're trying to rationalise it in terms of what's a likely motive. Why would a family be murdered? You could be looking for a crazed, maniacal killer who's randomly struck at a household. You could be looking for aggravated burglars where it's gone horribly, horribly wrong. Are the family involved in some way with organised crime? Is this a contract killing because it's so brutal? You never stop searching your mind for options and potential and possibilities.
In Wootton, the heavy police presence has drawn in local reporter Daniel Owens.
It was around about 10 o'clock on the Sunday night when I first arrived on the scene. There was no information coming from the police. We couldn't speak to officers who were inside the house. All we were getting was the people outside guarding the scene, and they weren't telling us anything. I met a couple of lads down there who knew the family vaguely, and they seemed quite upset at what they'd heard. And there were theories doing the rounds that it was potentially a murder-suicide situation. When you have a man and a woman dead in the same house, one killed the other, turned the knife on himself, etc. And that was certainly something that we expected to be exploring.
But in a fast-moving investigation, it's quickly established that the culprit isn't likely to be one of the family.
Clearly, because of the violence that had been used, it was just obvious to the officers that this was an all-out slaughter of 4 people. The big demand at that stage is, well, there are 2. The first one is the preservation of the scene and to make sure that you extract and harvest every centimetre of forensic evidence that you can get hold of. And the other one is to start thinking about who's done this and why.
With a murderer in their midst, police are also aware that villagers could be at risk.
The overriding factor in terms of the community is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear that it might happen again, fear that there's a killer on the loose, that their homes and their loved ones and their families aren't safe.
Police held a press conference and details started to emerge, and we knew this was a story that we'd never seen the likes of before.
For villagers, the news turns what was a happy bank holiday to celebrate the marriage of Prince William and Kate into a tragic event on their own doorstep.
When everybody's enjoying a day, and it was a beautiful day, it's hard to believe that something so vicious can happen. We were just stunned, really stunned. You can't believe it, because you cannot understand, A, why anybody could do that to a family and to children. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
Well, I was walking to my grandparents and I saw there was a bit of commotion going on the street. I was about 2 streets away. So, yeah, it was very weird. I don't think I wanted to leave the house for a while. I think it made everyone a bit more cautious about what was going on.
People were very on edge. I mean, I wouldn't walk on my own anywhere. I think you didn't feel safe in the village anymore. You don't ever feel like something like that's ever going to happen in a little village.
I was absolutely devastated. I really could not get my head around it. It was a very, very sad day. Not just for me, but for all of my colleagues, for the whole community that we work in here.
As the community mourns, police need to establish exactly when the Ding family were killed.
The initial response is pretty much routine. You're starting to set up initial house-to-house inquiries, not structured formal ones, but sort of people knocking doors. Have you seen anything strange or suspicious? Has there been any screams, shouts, noises?
But the neighbours haven't seen or heard anything.
Effectively, we've got 4 people who've been slaughtered in their own home and very little else by way of information.
As each member of the family is examined, it's apparent that whoever was responsible carried out a frenzied attack.
The results of the post-mortem showed the true extent of the brutality involved. The family were subjected to a total of 51 stab wounds between them, with Jeff and his wife killed in the kitchen and the girls killed upstairs in their bedroom trying to hide from their killer.
In the house, a possible murder weapon is found. It's been cleaned and left on the kitchen worktop. And as police comb the scene for clues, they find a puzzling item in the Ding's letterbox. It's a calling card from West Midlands Police, and it's been left just hours before the bodies were discovered.
The visit took place on the Sunday morning, quite early on. Obviously, no reply at the front door, but it's early on a Sunday morning, not unreasonable for people to be in bed. It's a bank holiday weekend. The officers got no reply.
Why had the police visited the Ding's home early that morning? Who did they want to speak to? And was this in some way connected to their murders?
Someone I'd worked with previously was a detective superintendent in West Midlands. He rang me to say, was I aware of this missing persons inquiry?
Police had visited the Dings in relation to a missing persons inquiry, that of 52-year-old An Zhangdu.
An Zhangdu was a native of China and came over here in the late 90s with his wife, and he ran a herbal medicines business, which he ran with the Ding family for some time.
An Zhang had left his home on the bank holiday Friday, 2 days before his business partners, the Ding's bodies, were discovered.
An Zhangdu left his wife at home watching the wedding while he boarded a train to Birmingham, where he went into his business premises.
He was going to open up the shop, albeit a bank holiday, albeit Kate and William's wedding. He'd gone in to do some work. When An Zhangdu didn't return from work, his wife, she started to become concerned about him, where he might be, what state he was in.
It was totally out of character for him, and she was tearing her hair out with despair at where he was.
At some point later in that day, she reported him as a missing person to West Midlands Police.
An Zhang's wife also described the night before he went missing and an unexpected knock at their door late at night.
Court officers turned up at An Zhangdu's house and served court document. The ultimate outcome of the service of that court process would have resulted in bankruptcy for Mr. Du and his family. Mr. Du did not sleep that night. He was pacing up and down. He was clearly angry, agitated. It really had disturbed him.
The missing persons inquiry was raised on the Saturday, and as part of that investigation, police attended An Zhangdu's business premises in Birmingham, where they found a note, effectively saying goodbye to his wife.
Leaving a note and with no contact for 4 days, police consider the possibility An Zhang has taken his own life.
Clearly, you know, in terms of mindset, in terms of where he was at mentally at that stage, that would ring significant alarm bells for both, obviously, his wife and the police investigating his disappearance.
Police want to know, what was An Zhangdu's fate? Could he also have been a victim of the Ding's killer?
What detectives were left pondering was whether the missing persons case was now linked to a quadruple murder.
But what detectives uncover next points not only to An Zhang's fate, but also a motive for murder.
There was this legal dispute over business between the two families, and that there was a strong possibility that something had led to a coming together of Mr. Du on the one side and the Ding family on the other.
The quiet village of Wootton has been shocked by the mass murder of the Ding family. University lecturer Jeff, language teacher Helen, and their daughters Zing and Alice. All 4 have been found stabbed to death.
Wootton was not an area affected by crime, yet all of a sudden the world's media descended on their doorstep. It went from 0 to 60 in seconds.
I doubt anybody in the country had really heard about Wootton Parish, and suddenly it was all over the news, headline news. It was shocking that actually somebody had murdered somebody in our village, and it's suddenly all over the world. On the BBC, for want of a better word, suddenly Wootton is there. It's just bizarre.
It's just a normal village that people come to and live or work or whatever. It's just a normal village. When we heard what happened, how it happened, you can't believe it because you cannot understand why anybody could do that to a family and to children. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock.
Police have linked another investigation to the Ding's murder, that of a missing persons inquiry for former business partner An Zhangdu. He disappeared just days before the family of 4 were found, and it's been discovered that both families were at war.
An Zhangdu and his wife had been involved in a bitter legal dispute with the Dings since 1999. It had been rumbling on for a long time. This relates to a breakdown in the business relationship.
This falling out resulted in a 10-year legal battle, which culminated in a late-night visit from lawyers.
Du and his wife had been served with a court injunction ordering them to repay £88,000, which forced them into a financial black hole and near bankruptcy.
This is a man that's completely at 6s and 7s. He's been knocked completely off his axis in terms of his future and what's going to happen to him.
Du clearly felt massively aggrieved. He'd put his life's work into this business and had it torn from underneath him, really.
That's when the bells start ringing and you've got the basis of a real solid motive for homicide.
Police believe An Zang Du's anger at being summoned to pay the Dings an £88,000 settlement makes him a prime suspect. But they have yet to find any evidence which connects him to the crime.
What we would have to do is put Mr. Du at the scene of the murders.
All eyes turn to tracking An Zang Du's movements on the day he went missing. He's first spotted on CCTV at his business in Birmingham.
He left the shop probably within 10 or 15 minutes of having arrived there.
He's next seen heading to a train station.
We traced him to New Street, so therefore we knew which train and platform he was on.
An Zang Du then boards a train to Northampton.
There's CCTV footage of him on an escalator at Northampton bus station. So we know he transferred from the train station to the bus station. We then know that he got onto a bus that went to Wootton Village, and there is CCTV of An Zang Du actually asking the driver of that bus for directions. Obviously, he was trying to establish where Jeff and Helen's house was in Pioneer Close.
So if you see down the road and you see the bus stop just down the road, that's where he came off the bus to come into the village. He got off and he came down this way and I think went into the local store and asked for directions. So why would you think if somebody's asking you directions that there's anything the matter? You just think he's going to meet friends on that special day.
This represents a significant milestone in both inquiries. The person at the heart of the missing persons case, An Zang Du, has been placed in the vicinity of the Dings family home on the day they were murdered.
So we're now putting him closer and closer to the scene, and subsequently we have the sighting of a gentleman of Chinese appearance stood outside the Ding family household, probably about 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 29th. So it's getting more and more and more likely that that person is An Zang Du.
Now a prime suspect in the murder of a family of 4, police need to find out where he went next. But then the trail goes cold. An Zang Du isn't seen on CCTV either leaving the area on foot or by bus.
There was an understandable level of fear among neighbours. 4 of their friends, including 2 young children, had been killed, and the person responsible hadn't been apprehended. He was on the loose. Where was he? Would he return? Would he do it again?
With days since the murders took place and no idea where the suspect could be, detectives examine every possible angle.
He's already got a 2-day head start on us. What we discovered in house-to-house routine inquiries is that the Ding family, their family car had gone in for service, and as a result they'd been given a hire car or a courtesy car to run around in, and that car was not at the Ding family household.
Police were now able to issue a name and a picture of their main suspect with a warning not to approach him in any circumstances. They revealed the car he was driving, and the country was put on alert to help find this man who was wanted in connection with 4 brutal murders.
The manhunt for An Zang Du puts all forces across the UK on alert.
Police investigating the murders of a family of 4 in the village of Wootton, Northampton, have released information on a man wanted for questioning. 52-year-old Chinese national Ang Zhangdu was last seen 4 days ago, driving a silver Vauxhall Corsa. Members of the public are being advised not to approach him.
The pressure's immense, and it's a responsibility not just on your own professional reputation, but, you know, there's a community out there who expects the police to capture somebody who's this dangerous.
Key to tracking Ang Zhangdu is using automatic number plate recognition cameras.
We were hoping that modern technology such as ANPR, which is a very, very standard form of police inquiry, would help us out in that situation.
After multiple inquiries, a lead comes in. The stolen car's number plate triggered a camera on the night of the murders at a service station just outside Northampton on the M1.
And it showed that that vehicle, that hire vehicle, had been there at about 9:45 on the evening of the 29th. And Ang Zhangdu had been in to buy some chocolate or a drink, and importantly, a map book.
But where Ang Zhang is going, detectives don't know. ANPR cameras are checked, and there's no sign of the stolen car on any road in the UK. Ang Zhangdu has vanished.
At this point, police had no idea of Ang Zhangdu's whereabouts. Was he dead? Was he alive? Was he even in the UK?
While the manhunt intensifies, the Ding's friends and family are trying to come to terms with what's happened.
There was great sorrow from the students, especially those who were close to him doing projects and so on with him. A great sense of shock and sorrow that someone that helped them so much, of course, now was no longer with us.
For Zing and Alice's friends, meeting at their first county orchestral practice is a traumatic time.
It affected many of the other students very deeply. At orchestral rehearsals in the following week, flowers were left on their chairs. You know, teaching is one thing, but no one can prepare you for... How does a teacher cope with this? I don't know. No one prepares you for that.
For Jeff's family, struggling with the loss is only compounded by the grief of not knowing why this happened.
Actually, I first learned from the internet news, and I was completely shocked. I even cannot finish the news. Okay, once I saw the picture, I just, I cannot believe there's a 4 members all gone. It's just complete shock. Okay, and then I think about my parents. If I cannot, I manage that, think about the parents. They lost their children, their grandchildren, only one day.
Police investigating the murders of a family of 4 from Northampton have said they are concentrating their inquiries in London after a car stolen from the property was found parked near the Edgware Road.
After weeks of searching, the police get their first lead on their hunt for Ang Zhangdu, and it's created major problems for the investigation.
Unfortunately for us, Mr. Du, in his stolen hire car, managed to get all the way to St John's Wood in London without triggering a single police ANPR system. There was a point in this inquiry I was thinking if we didn't have bad luck, we'd have no luck at all, because not only did he miss ANPR, but when that car's parked in a side street in St John's Wood, the car is ticketed 9 times in 11 days. So we're now 13 days behind there. That's a significant problem in an investigation, because if you can go more or less anywhere in the world in 2 days, the world is literally your oyster in 13.
Whilst Du could be anywhere in the world, police concentrate their search in London.
Anyone who's been to London knows how easy it is to become anonymous in a city of that size and what opportunities there are to disappear within various communities. Obviously, that was a huge concern to us because if Ang Zhang-du wanted to lie low, then there's no finer place for him to do that and become anonymous and not be troubled too much. We're back to needle in a haystack time.
House-to-house inquiries uncover CCTV footage of Ang Zhang-du abandoning his stolen car in the early hours of the Friday night. Which reinforces detective suspicions that he's still in the area. The investigation moves to Chinatown in London's West End, and officers hand out wanted posters.
Obviously, language is an issue, although clearly most of the Chinese community within those areas will speak English. I think the most difficult cultural barrier is a natural reluctance to become involved with the police. And some people, even thought it was bad luck to put posters in shop windows and things like that. So, you've got to overcome those, but all you can do is reach out and engage and try and gain their confidence, but it certainly doesn't make it easier.
Whilst he's made it to London, police intel suggests that Ang Zhang-du wouldn't have gone far.
He was described to us as somebody innocuous, someone who probably would struggle to find his way round of his own volition,
Little did police know just how wrong this intel would prove to be.
Du had made his way through France and Spain and had been seen getting on a ferry from Tangier to Morocco. He'd also been stopped at a border in Algeria. With multiple sightings, this had now become an international manhunt.
Police hunting for a man suspected of murdering a family of 4 from Wootton Village in Northamptonshire have put out a reward of £25,000 for information which could lead to his arrest. Detectives say there have been over 380 sightings of Ang Zhang-du across Europe, but the 52-year-old has now been missing for almost a year.
Having reviewed over 5,000 hours of CCTV footage and interviewing over 2,000 people, police have discovered that Ang Zhang-du is no longer in the country.
It's a mind-blowing thought because literally there are 6 billion people in this world. Where do we start? Which country do we start with? You're just thinking, oh my goodness, where do we go from here?
I doubt anybody in the country had really heard about Wootton Parish. And suddenly it was all over the news, headline news. This guy had come into our parish, he'd committed these dreadful murders, and then he was running off around the world where they couldn't find him. It put Wootton for a while in the news.
It was strange having Wootton put out there like that.
Through CCTV analysis, police have uncovered Ang Zhang-du's journey from Wootton to London and then onwards.
He took a coach to the coast and then over to Paris, then onwards to a Spanish port. And the long and short of it is, by the time the police became aware of the bodies, he was out of the country. He's gone.
The police reach out to forces around the world and decide to travel to Spain.
Detectives had issued an appeal on the Spanish version of Crime Watch, and that appeal went out far and wide across the country.
That broadcast was seen also in Morocco, and my understanding is that as a result of that, a supervisor or foreman on the building site where Ang Zhang-du had been working as a labourer, he alerted the local authorities, and the local authorities arrested Ang Zhang-du after something like 14 months of being on the run.
Yeah, I remember when they caught him, I remember thinking, how on earth did he get there? Unnoticed and working, actually. How is he working? It shows they don't have the same laws that we have here about working. But yes, it was great. It was a good feeling to know he'd been caught.
I remember when the news broke out that he was being extradited back to the UK to be charged for the murders. Everyone felt like justice was finally going to be done.
But even though Aung San Suu is safely locked up in a Moroccan jail, it's another 6 months before he's returned to the UK and charged with 4 counts of murder. It's taken over 2 years, but the trial into the murders of 4 members of the Ding family begins at Northampton Crown Court.
Surprisingly, Duu pleaded not guilty in the court case. His version of events was that he'd gone round there to simply talk to the Duu family and things had spiralled out of control.
The issue for this trial was not so much whether he killed the Ding family, it's whether he did it as a murderer of sound mind or whether there was some kind of diminished element.
The court hears how on the 29th of April 2011, Aung San Suu was furious after he received a court order after a lengthy legal battle with Jeff and Helen Ding. His assets were frozen and he was ordered to pay the Dings £88,000. So, while the nation watched William and Kate get married, Aung San Suu had gone to his shop to pick up a kitchen knife. Then, he headed towards the village where the Ding family lived.
My belief is that when he left the New Street station just after 11, he was going to Wootton in Northamptonshire with one thing on his mind, and that thing was murder, the ultimate revenge.
Aung San Suu admits he entered the Ding's house via the back gate and finds Jeff Ding in the kitchen. They argue, and he stabs Jeff multiple times before attacking his wife Helen. He then goes upstairs and kills Zing and Alice. They are both huddled together in one bedroom.
What I can't reconcile, what I'll never be able to understand, is when that anger, that evilness, that bile is such that it makes a grown man climb a set of stairs, enter a room with 2 young girls cowering on a bed, frightened beyond description, and then plunge a knife into both of them and fatally wound them both without any compunction or restriction, just to execute 2 young. I'll never get over it. I'll never understand it.
During the trial, the jury also hears a recording of a 999 call. It was made by one of the girls when they heard Aung San Suu attacking their parents.
It transpired that a 999 call had been made from the property at the time of the killings. Police had responded to the call but had been sent to the wrong address and had no answer, and therefore the case was effectively closed.
I've heard that tape recording. It's horrific. Absolutely horrific. And those screams, I won't forget them, because I know what was happening when those girls were screaming, because a murderer had entered the room and was in the process of fatally murdering those 2 girls. Absolutely. I can't reconcile myself to that action. It's horrendous.
As the trial progresses, further details emerge about what happened after Duu murdered the family.
After killing the family of 4, Duu stayed in the house for 6 hours and actually went to sleep.
He then takes the time to wash the kitchen knife that he brought with him and leaves it on the kitchen worktop before stealing money and the Ding's hire car. He manages to evade authorities for over a year. But after a 2-week trial, Aung San Suu is found guilty of all 4 counts of murder.
Aung San Suu was found guilty of multiple murders and was sentenced to 40 years in prison, the longest sentence ever passed down in the history of courts in Northamptonshire.
With all due respect, Aung San Suu is exactly where he should be in terms of the crime he committed and public safety.
The community were pleased that something so barbaric had gone full circle, really, and the man who had carried out this dreadful crime had been put away.
The fact that he's never going to get out of prison, yeah, but it still should never have happened. But they've got as much justice as possible.
After 10 years, those that knew the family are still coming to terms with the loss.
I don't think there's ever any way that justice can ever really be done that can make up, really, for what happened. There isn't. And that's the closest we can get. And whatever punishment, he got is never going to make up for, for what happened that day.
I suppose there was some sense of, OK, that's over now. But you're never going to get those girls back, ever. And that's going to remain with me for the rest of my life.
Aung San Suu will be 92 years old before he's eligible for release. But for Jeff's brother, Ji Xiang, life will never be the same.
I cannot accept, the reality, basically. And then I think about my parents. They lost their children, their grandchildren, only one day. I have many questions to ask him. Among them, the only one question that strikes me most is, I want to ask him, how could you stab a knife into an innocent girl's heart? Not once, but twice. How could you do that? An innocent girl, you get that in. I'm not that confident whether I can rebuild my life anymore. I don't think my life will be the same again as before.
Good morning, Surrey Police Contact Centre. How can I help you?
A strange thing happened to me this morning. I went for a walk and got attacked.
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. Like, something serious has happened now, like what?
No issues with anything, with anybody or anything that could be related, no?
No, last year I had an issue with my partner, but that all sorted and we're friends again.
A very significant head injury that had been suffered. It had been caused by someone, and this became a murder investigation.
This murder was one of the most brutal that I have seen within 20 years.
You never think it's going to happen on your own doorstep. There's some evil people about.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do.
On the eastern side of the River Blackwater in Surrey lies the small village of Ash.
It sort of sits in between Aldershot in Hampshire and Guildford. Ash is fairly typical of a lot of places in Surrey in that you will find lots of different communities within a community. From a policing perspective, not a lot happens.
They're a very close-knit community around here. Everyone knows everyone.
At the heart of the community lives 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
She was really a lovable and special person. She did have a big circle of friends because she used to work in Potter's music shop, and then she left there due to illness.
She'd always say hello or wave at the window if she was in the house. She was very much always quite happy and never seemed to say a bad word about anyone.
Auntie Joy was a little naughty auntie, if I can say. She's a little naughty auntie in the way of that. She was one of those that turned up unannounced, which was quite funny. And she'd turn up, I'm not staying long, and her not staying long would always turn into at least a couple of hours.
In 2021, Joy started dating local man Trevor Dibner. They had known each other for 18 years.
Trevor Dibner is somebody, again, who has spent his life working. Trevor had a number of businesses and was known locally as a taxi driver. He's also a mechanic and latterly had started working for Ford, where he was doing MOTs. He was somebody who had an interest in motorsport, and he collected model buses, which you know was a passion of his.
I knew him in my teenage years when he would be driving the minibuses, and we would hire minibuses from him to do runs to girls' nights out, if I was out with the girls, or if we were going to the Ascot races with our partners, he'd take us there.
They used to go and see a stock car, go and watch stock car. They also used to go to these old bus fairs and everything. And I think it was just a little bit of an attraction.
In October 2022, the couple moved in together and their relationship flourished.
Trevor and Joy became engaged at Sandown Racecourse on the 4th of December, and Trevor announced it, as we do these days, on Facebook to tell friends, contacts that he and Joy had become engaged. Joy was at a time in her life where things were starting to go right. She had things to look forward to, and things were going well for her.
But life for the happy couple is about to change.
I received a call very late on the 11th of May from the on-call crime scene manager who was in attendance at Churchview in Ash. He'd responded to reports of a suspicious death.
On the 11th of May, Trevor had gone to work and spent the day at work. He'd been unable to get hold of Joy throughout the day. And then he came back to his home address and found Joy was lying on the floor, not moving. He called the ambulance service to report this. At first, it wasn't clear to the officers who were there whether or not this was a case where somebody else had been involved. There was the potential. Joy was quite vulnerable and unstable on her feet. She could have fallen.
Within the small community, news begins to spread of a police presence at Joy's house.
I heard from my eldest grandson. I said, what's the matter? Come on. He said, it's Joy. I said, oh no, she's not in hospital again, is she? Just like that. And he said, no, it's worse than that, Nan. I said, what do you mean it's worse than that?
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. They're pulling the sofas outside the house. There's a carpet outside the house. Like, they're bringing everything out. They're all in hazmat suits, everything. And I was like, shit, like, something serious has happened now. Like, what?
Phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law. And she said, have you heard? I went, oh, what's happened? She said, about your auntie. I went, auntie who? Your Auntie Joy. I went, what do you mean? And she said, she's been beaten up. And I put the phone down, and my hands were so clammy. I looked at my partner, I was sat beside him, and I went, you need to take me to my Auntie Joyce, please, now.
And it was raining, it was cold. Got up there, the police cars were there. It was cornered off from round the corner, tape, and the police were standing outside. We parked up, and I went across to the policeman, and I said, and he said, who are you? I said, I'm Joy's eldest sister. I said, can you please tell me what's happened to her? He said, I can't at the moment. I said, please tell me, is she alive or is she dead? I said, tell me. I've got to know. So he said, well, I'm ever so sorry. I said, don't say any more.
It was quite quickly then all over social media. Something's happened on Church View, the police are all there. Doesn't really happen, especially in a quiet community like this.
The policeman stood there, guarding the door, another policeman inside. Everybody gathered around, lined my auntie's pathway. And I said to the officer, excuse me, can you tell me, please, what's going on? And as he was talking, as the officer was talking to us, I happened to look down a bit to my auntie's doormat. I saw my auntie's foot, just a big pool of blood. About I did a police size. But her foot was buckled back, like as if she'd been crawling, trying to get into the front room. Fighting for her life.
Surrey detectives are at the scene of a suspected assault, which has left local woman Joy Bolton dead. Her fiancé, Trevor Dibner, has called emergency services after returning home from work to find her motionless on the floor.
The injuries that Joy sustained were amongst the worst head injuries that I've ever observed. It was very clear that there was no other mechanism than a repeated assault that could have caused them. That repeated assault had been committed by somebody.
As the police begin their investigation, Joy's family remain outside her home, waiting for information. Joy's fiancé is still on the scene. He's the only one who can tell them anything.
I was sitting in the back of my eldest grandson's car, and Joy's partner come over. I said, tell me what's happened. And he said, well, I come home about 20 to 6 tonight and had to push my way through the front door. And there she was laying there. He said, but I tried ringing her between 10 and 10:30 like I normally do. And he couldn't get an answer. I said, well, why didn't you go home and check on her?
While detectives launch a murder inquiry, their colleagues are looking into reports of another attack on a female, just a few streets from Joy's house.
Yeah, I won't went for a walk this morning and this woman come up to me, asked me if I was Sarah. I said yes. The next thing, she's pulling my hair out, grabbed my carrier bag, which had my raincoat in it, and grabbed my glasses off me. I don't know if she threw them away because I couldn't find them.
Okay.
And ran off.
Okay, so she literally just said, are you Sarah?
The woman is alleged to have pulled her hair and scratched her, as well as taking a carrier bag that she had with her, which she said had her coat and glasses in.
She said, no, she grabbed my hair and said that'll come in handy, because she took a chunk of hair.
You don't know the lady at all?
Not a clue, not a clue.
But she knew your name?
Yeah, she said stay away as well.
She stated that she had been approached by a woman who was unknown to her, described her as late 40s, early 50s, dark glasses, long black coat, hood up, carrying a plastic bag.
It just seems strange that she said that will come in handy, my chunk of hair.
Yeah.
That's what my daughter said. She said, I don't like that. Mum, what's she going to use your hair for?
The woman had walked away from her assault, suffering only minor injuries. Officers take the details of the woman and are surprised to discover she is Sarah Mackenzie, Trevor Dibner's ex.
Sarah Mackenzie also lived in Ash. She'd previously been in a relationship with Trevor, and they'd lived together for a number of years until Trevor made the decision that he would leave Sarah to be with Joy.
Police now need to look into the fact Trevor's fiancée and his former partner have been attacked on the same day.
It's unusual and it's a coincidence given what had happened to Joy. So forensic strategies and search strategies were put in place to investigate the robbery of Sarah Mackenzie just as much as the homicide of Joy Bolton.
Sarah phoned Trevor straight away and told him that she was attacked. Sarah described the person as 40-odd-year-old, jogging towards her, ripped her glasses off her face.
Trevor agreed to go round to Sarah's house on his way home, which was something that he would often do and had continued to do even after leaving Sarah for Joy. Trevor said that he spent a few minutes there, made sure that Sarah was okay before going back to his home.
Detectives are suspicious of Trevor's behaviour. He's told them he had spent all day at work worrying about Joy because he couldn't get hold of her. Now they discover he hadn't gone straight home.
There were a couple of things about what had gone on that weren't or didn't seem quite right. First, he had a concern for Joy, who he's very clear about it was the love of his life, and he didn't go home and see that she was okay. And second, that on his way home, in spite of being worried about Joy and worried that she may have fallen, he did go and check that Sarah was okay in relation to the robbery.
Despite their relationship being over, Trevor maintained a friendship with his former partner.
She used to text before he even left for work. He used to read her messages, then text her back to say that he'd be going round there.
Trevor and Sarah were together for 13 years in what seems to be a tumultuous relationship by all accounts, even from Sarah herself.
She was a jealous woman. And she did go round to Joy's place and said to him, what she got, what I haven't got. And apparently he said, you haven't got a patch on, Joy.
After hearing about Joy's death from Trevor himself, Sarah immediately makes her way to their home.
She'd come to the scene apparently to offer some support to Trevor. Her actions at the scene went beyond what you would expect a normal bystander to do, so she tried to get into the address to see what had happened and had to be stopped by one of our colleagues from the ambulance service, stopping her getting in.
Here's his ex-partner. She's just come, give him football, but also something happened to her today that may be related. So saying about that'd be great for DNA.
So I've got a reference number. Yeah, she pulled my hair, and as you can see, I got scratched. And she said, "Yeah, I can use that later." So with this happening, makes me wonder if she wanted DNA, hair, and scratch, and now somebody doesn't like him, obviously.
Yeah. Hi, chap. You okay? Yeah. I'm very sorry. Very sorry. What's happened today?
She started to tell people that she'd been the victim of a robbery, and that it had happened about 200 yards or so away from the address that we were at. And she made the connection that it was likely to be about Trevor, and she used the phrase along the lines of, "Isn't it strange that Trevor's two ladies have been attacked on the same day?"
The potentially linked attacks raise suspicions at the scene, and police make a decision.
Trevor was initially arrested and nominated as a suspect in relation to the murder of Joy.
But that wasn't all.
It started to be suspected that Sarah Mackenzie knew something about what had happened, and a decision was made that she would be arrested for murder.
Detectives in Surrey have two suspects in custody for the murder of 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
We knew that somebody was arrested. First of all, I said a woman. I said straight away, Sarah. And then they said about the man. I said Trevor. I felt really sick.
The hypotheses that I considered in this case were, first, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie. Second, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie, assisted by Trevor Dibner. Third, that Joy Bolton had been killed by the robber who had attacked Sarah Mackenzie earlier that day.
As you can see, I got scratched, and she said, "Yeah, I can use that later."
The reason that Sarah was suspected was the result of her, frankly, bizarre behaviour at the scene, as well as a robbery that she'd reported earlier in the day, which put her within the vicinity of the murder at the right time of the murder. Trevor was suspected as Trevor had been to Sarah Mackenzie's address before going back to find Joy, which was thought to be unusual and led to him being suspected of Joy's murder.
With the former couple now in custody, investigators need evidence and turn to the residence of Ash. The smallest observation will be vital in proving their case.
A neighbour of Joy's had seen a figure who he initially described as being male, but later wasn't sure if it was a male or a female, who was dressed in dark clothing with a mask and carrying a white carrier bag, approaching Joy's door and hammering on the door for some time until the door was opened. Another neighbour had heard a disturbance. There was another neighbour upstairs who again saw a figure approaching the door, so there was a lot of consistent evidence.
The neighbours help police establish a timeline around Joy's murder, but the details are sketchy, leaving detectives with a number of possible scenarios to examine.
I think it's difficult when you're in that situation, living in such a quiet village. Also, there's the element of not wanting to cause a fuss, seeing someone walking in dark clothing in the street and being at the door. As much as an argument did happen and neighbours heard what was going on, you don't expect murder.
While officers on the ground try to piece together events leading up to the murder, detectives are interviewing 64-year-old Trevor Dibner and 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie.
After Trevor had been arrested, he was interviewed and gave a full account of what had happened. He said that on the day this happened, they'd followed their normal routine, that he'd got out of bed and Joy had made his sandwiches, kissed him goodbye, and he'd gone off to work where he was doing MOT tests. He said during the course of the day he would normally phone Joy. He did so, but was unable to get hold of her, and he became quite worried that something may have happened to her, perhaps she'd fallen, or that there was some problem at home. He decided, because he didn't know that he couldn't leave work, and that he would effectively deal with it later.
Why did Trevor go to Sarah's before going back to check his beloved, who he wanted to marry? Why did he go there first and not to Auntie Joy's? Why?
Sarah Mackenzie was arrested. Her initial reaction was one of surprise, as though she didn't understand why this had happened to her. And she maintained that initially. Her initial response to the questions asked by my colleagues who interviewed her was no comment, but in a way that she didn't know what this was about and had no understanding of it. She did become unwell while she was in custody and was taken to hospital.
Meanwhile, Joy's fiancé, Trevor, has been held under suspicion of murder for 36 hours. Detectives are running out of time to charge him.
My name's Trevor and I was Joy's fiancé. Trying to prove your innocence is very hard. Very hard. But yeah, she was just so nice, so genuine. Yeah, she's Joy by name and Joy by nature. The 7 months that Joy and I had together was just out of this world. Out of this world.
The day of his fiancée's death is etched in Trevor's memory.
I left her in the morning and she was fine, and I came home to find her in the evening. You know, it was just gut-wrenching, really. I just knew straight away looking at her, I knew she was dead. I touched her, she was freezing cold, but I don't want to tell you what else I saw because it was gory, you know, and that wasn't by just falling over. But I had to hold it together because I obviously getting arrested, etc. But that was another daunting thing for me. I'd be, all of a sudden they've stood there and said, Trevor, we're going to arrest you on suspicion of murder. And I'm thinking, but I haven't done anything.
Police released Trevor after questioning, but he still has to be ruled out of any involvement.
Blood staining was found on his clothing. It was all looked at in terms of blood pattern analysis and compared to the account that he'd given, that he'd entered the address, found Joy and knelt down next to her, and it was all consistent with his account. There was nothing on his clothing that would have been consistent with him having been present at the time of the offence.
We were able to take Trevor's account, and there were a number of things that he told us that we were able to check. The movements of his car on ANPR were consistent with his account. His workplace confirmed that he'd spent the day at work to the extent that there was CCTV there which showed he was at work all day. It was very clear that Trevor Dibnah was not responsible.
Investigators turned their full attention on 61-year-old grandmother, Sarah Mackenzie. Few people know her better than Trevor.
Sarah's, she's stubborn, and also Sarah's got a, let's say, a controlling streak in her. She likes to be in charge, you know, but that's what she is. That's what she is.
Despite the couple separating, Trevor and Sarah would regularly keep in touch. When she texts to tell him she's been robbed, he's concerned.
Sarah's shown me where she'd had her hair pulled because she's got short hair anyway, and she spoke about it again. And I said, well, OK, but look, I've got to go. Maybe, yeah, perhaps I should have come home earlier in the day, but I don't, what do I say? What do I say to somebody about I need to go home and find, you know, because I can't get hold of somebody? The way I see it, I just had to wait till I got home from work. While I was on my way home, she was texting me to see if, was everything OK, is there something wrong? But I didn't answer her back because obviously I had to deal with calling the ambulance and the police because I'd found Joy on the floor. And I quite obviously knew she was dead. Then I texted her back and said, no, it's not. No, it's not okay. And as I say, when the ambulance turned up, she turned up in her car behind it and come over and stood there and held my arm as if she was coming to comfort me.
On body cam footage, police body cam, him and Sarah holding arms, linked arms, stood near a lamppost outside my Auntie Joy's property.
As Trevor tries to come to terms with Joy's murder and being a suspect, Sarah Mackenzie is released from hospital and taken back to the police station for further questioning. She claims she has no recollection of the day of Joy's murder, but evidence from the local neighbourhood puts her clearly in the frame.
We conducted a number of CCTV inquiries and found a camera on Churchview Road. This captured an image of somebody walking down Churchview Road wearing black clothing. The officer who viewed the CCTV recognised that figure as being Sarah Mackenzie.
And what happened was that in the morning of the day, Sarah Mackenzie went to work as usual, was dropped off at 9:30 in the morning by her work colleague, and proceeded very quickly to change into a full disguise, black clothing, mask, gloves, etc., arm herself with a heavy implement, and walk to Joy Bolton's address. Along this stretch of pavement, Sarah was walking along towards Joy's house before the murder was committed, dressed in all black, very eerie costume, walking with a lot of purpose towards Joy's house. Almost 15 minutes later, she heads back the same direction, same pavement, same path, after committing the murder, dressed in the same outfit, all black, head to toe, again with purpose as she walked away from the scene of the crime. She was caught on the CCTV around here.
Evidence from the forensic team at the flat helps piece together what happened inside.
The property Churchview Ash was a ground floor maisonette. Front door opened into a small hallway with a bathroom in front of you. The female was found lay face down with her feet in the threshold of the hallway to the living room and her head pointing into the living room. The head injuries were horrific. The victim had an injury to her forehead, which potentially was the first injury to bleed, and that may have caused the blood within the hallway. The majority of her injury was to the back of her head, and that was likely to have been caused when she was face down in the living room. The post-mortem concluded that the victim would have been rapidly incapacitated, so it's likely that she would have been on the floor when the majority of the blows were inflicted.
Detectives are left in little doubt that Sarah was responsible for the attack on Joy Bolton, and her house is searched.
Given that during her account of the robbery, she stated that she'd returned home and taken a bath, I asked that a scientist attend that address with a CSI to conduct a luminol search. Luminol can detect blood that has been diluted up to 10,000 times. It's an incredible search tool for us where offenders have tried to clean up after they've committed an offence. These images are taken within the bathroom at Sarah Mackenzie's address. This picture shows what can be seen with the naked eye. As you can see, there is no visible blood staining at all. And this image shows those areas with the luminol visible. So that is what a reaction, a positive reaction with luminol looks like. The areas that are marked here are the areas that were swabbed and showed that Joy Bolton's DNA was represented within them. That evidence for us was key. Within that blood, which was swabbed by a CSI, was Sarah Mackenzie's DNA, as you would expect, as it's her bathroom. but also there were very small amounts of Joy Bolton's DNA as well. And although we couldn't categorically say that it was blood, luminol would indicate that it was.
I was confident that we had a good and strong circumstantial case with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie, but we were missing something.
Fingernail swabs and cuttings were taken from Joy, and while Sarah was still in custody, I made a fast-track submission of those swabs and cuttings to the lab. Very quickly, that came back with Sarah's DNA under Joy's fingernails on her right hand, which corresponded to the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
In Surrey, analysis of DNA found under murder victim Joy Bolton's fingernails has come back as Sarah Mackenzie's.
Whilst Joy was vulnerable, she did put up a fight, and one of her last actions was to prove crucial in proving this case.
The DNA analysis reveals the sample to be a 1 in a billion match, proving that Mackenzie was at the scene when Joy died.
If, you know, Joy had to stand up to anybody, she would. She did give her last fall, you know. She was very weak, could barely stand up unaided, as I say, but she fought back and slapped, scratched, whatever she did to Sarah's head, and thank goodness she did.
But Sarah says she can explain her DNA being on Joy. She reminds investigators that she too is the victim of an assault.
Sarah implied that the offender had stolen her DNA and planted it under Joy's fingernails after inflicting catastrophic injury. They would have had to have the presence of mind to have thought to have planted the DNA under the fingernail of Joy's right hand, which was in keeping with the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
The robbery is that it was intended to give Sarah Mackenzie a reason to be in the area that the murder had happened in case she'd been picked up on CCTV or seen by somebody, because she knew that Joy had scratched her, she knew that the police had her DNA, and she knew that we would find her through that to account for her DNA being on Joy's fingernails.
But Sarah sticks to her story, insisting that she was robbed on the same morning as Joy was attacked. A public appeal is made for information, but investigators find no evidence of a robbery having occurred.
With all of the circumstantial evidence and now a very good forensic hit, we were satisfied that there was more than enough evidence with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie with Joy's murder.
On the 17th of May 2023, Sarah Mackenzie is formally charged with the murder of Joy Bolton and perverting the course of justice. Police and prosecutors need to prepare for trial and identify a motive. Why would Sarah want Joy dead? A delve into the months leading up to the murder throws up some clues after Trevor left Sarah for Joy.
A fire was reported to the fire service initially of a shed in Sarah Mackenzie's front garden. At the time, it was treated as being of a suspicious origin. It was noted later that most of the property that was destroyed belonged to Trevor. Sarah Mackenzie was likely to have set the fire herself.
To me, it doesn't take much to work out what the problem was, why it happened. It purely happened because I put on Facebook the previous day that we'd got engaged. I mean, it's pretty obvious from that.
The fire was not the only disturbance that Sarah was accused of creating.
When he left her, she had damaged his property, thrown it out of the window, cut up his leather jacket, burnt photographs of his family.
And then a couple of weeks later, she then gets, my auntie gets a message on her phone, a shouting down message, you're this, you're that, you know, really nastily.
People say to me it's jealousy, and I do understand that people do get jealous, but do you still have to go to that length? Is there a necessity to go to that length?
Within 6 months of the brutal murder of Joy Bolton, 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie stands trial. She pleads not guilty.
On Thursday, the 11th of May 2023, between 10 o'clock and 10:20 a.m, Joy Bolton opened her front door to someone. Shortly after opening the door, that person proceeded to bludgeon her to death with a heavy implement. These are the first words that the jury heard about the case that they were about to try. They knew it was a murder. They knew nothing else.
5 weeks it went on for. Long 5 weeks, cold, wet, windy, horrible, reliving every moment.
It was just awful. It was awful every time going into that courtroom to think what you're going to hear next.
Sarah Mackenzie presented herself, as we anticipated she would, as somebody who herself was vulnerable and playing on her age.
I sat where I couldn't see her because I couldn't bear to face her for what she had done to my dear sister Joy.
But I think the worst thing is just knowing that Sarah didn't do it 20 plus times only. She kicked her as well. Like some, I don't know, like a dead thing at the side of the road, maybe. To hear that my auntie's flat was a blood-splattered place, a murder scene.
Sarah Mackenzie instructed her lawyers to go down the route of trying to blame someone, but it was plain from the police evidence, and indeed the evidence we called via the police officers, that there was no foundation to suggest that anybody else was a possible candidate for this crime.
After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
It didn't take the jury long to convict Sarah Mackenzie. That came as no surprise in reality, given the strength of the evidence.
Sarah Mackenzie is found guilty of murder and perverting the course of justice. She's sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years.
She just stood there and grinned. As much as say, oh well.
I'm sorry, at the end of the day, 26 years is still not going to bring Joy back. You know, I know it's supposed to be a life term, and in theory, she'll die in jail. But at the end of the day, that doesn't bring Joy back. She was just the love of my life.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do. Most people resist it. Unfortunately, for Joy Bolton, not Sarah Mackenzie.
In this particular case, which was a brutal, unprovoked and sustained attack on a vulnerable woman who had done nothing more than start a relationship with somebody, I felt enormous pride at the work that with the team that I work with. We were able to bring Sarah Mackenzie to justice, and that she is now in a place that she can cause no more harm to anybody else.
This case was exceptional. It's not often, if ever, that you have grandmothers appearing in a dock murdering their love rival. Someone who was completely normal, who was, as per the jury's verdict, enraged by jealousy and spite. It will remain in our memories for as long as we live, I'm sure.
A year on, and Joy's family are trying to come to terms with life without her.
My favourite memory of Joy is she'd always be there if you wanted somebody to talk to, and vice versa with me. She didn't deserve what she got. Didn't deserve it at all.
I go and see Auntie Joy at the grave, and I take my dog with me, because she loved my dog. And I sit and chat. It's not the same. She don't laugh anymore. I find it hard. I'll be driving through Ash, which isn't very often, because I can't bear it. Not round Auntie Joy's, I don't go round that way. Not ever since. But I look at the shops, see an old lady with a trolley, and I always look back. Is that Auntie Joy? This is not Auntie Joy. So you don't just murder one person. You hurt everybody.
Switchboard.
Hello, I want to report a missing person. She's my children's mum, and when me and the kids woke up in the morning, she wasn't there, but her car's still outside.
She has an accident somewhere or some kind of medical episode, come to some harm where she can't raise the alarm herself.
Half the time they've been found safe and well.
I thought she might have just gone for a nice little weekend away somewhere.
The days went by and we started to realise that something had probably gone wrong.
You just instinctively know that something's wrong, something's not right.
You are under arrest on suspicion of murder of Sarah Welgrave.
In the middle of the Kent countryside lies the quiet residential area of New Ash Green.
New Ash Green was built in the 1960s and 70s as a kind of model village. It's a sort of nice bit of suburbia that's sort of been plonked in the middle of the Kent countryside. Nice place to live, for bring up families, there's sports clubs, pretty quiet. There is quite a strong community there. Everyone knows each other and supports each other.
It was the perfect community for popular beautician Sarah Welgreen to set up home with her growing family.
As a daughter, Sarah was everything you could wish for. She was caring, she was incredible fun to be with, brilliant company on it. You know, we used to love going shopping, ate for lunch, going on holiday together. She was feisty, she was very caring. And she'd always, you know, she'd always stand up for the underdog. Loved her children without question, always there for them. What else can you say?
I lived in the same house for the entire time I was in secondary school. I've always been close to my mum. If I ever needed anything or needed someone to speak to, she would have always been there for me.
As well as sons Jack and Lewis from a previous relationship, Sarah also had 3 children with Ben Lacombe and dedicated her time to her family.
Sarah worked incredibly hard for her children. She had her day job, but she also had clients in the evening and at weekends, so she had her official clients at work, she had unofficial ones, and Everything she did for her children. If you went out shopping for the day, invariably the money would be spent on the children. She always made sure they had good holidays, Halloween, Easter, birthdays. Never missed a thing.
My mum, she always used to provide for us. She'd rather go without and see us have everything that she could give us, really. She'd always put us before herself, and it really did make her a good mum. It was great. I was proud of how she was and the woman she was.
The couple's dedication to their children meant that when their relationship broke down, they decided to do what was right for the kids.
They were going to co-parent the children together and just have different rooms in the house and just bring their 3 children up together in a household where they'll have their mum and their dad.
Despite the unconventional setup, it worked for both Sarah and Ben, and both started dating once again, with Sarah meeting Neil on a dating app in 2016.
She'd met Neil, who lived in Farnham. They were quite happy.
I did like Neil, and yeah, from the times I met him, he was a nice bloke. Neil did love my mum.
The couple soon got engaged, and there was more exciting news to come.
In October, she phoned me up. She was really, really happy. She just got this brand new job, pays more money, she'll be better off, the kids will be better off. She'll be able to help me out more with anything I need. So she was really excited to start it. So everything was looking up for her.
And she was absolutely thrilled to bits with it. She couldn't wait to get started. And that was, like she said, it's in the next phase of my life now.
On 9th of October 2018, just before 8 p.m, Sarah returns home from work, still on a high about the new job offer.
She'd come home and she'd been seen arriving, went into the house. She went to bed, had texted a boyfriend, sent a few text messages to other people. She told a friend that there's always something to look forward to. You've just got to open your eyes and dream.
The following morning, Sarah's boyfriend Neil texts Sarah, yet he doesn't receive any reply. After a few hours, he calls Sarah's ex, Ben, to ask if he knows where she is. But Ben tells Neil he thought she was with him.
Neil hadn't heard anything and wasn't getting responses back from Sarah, which was unusual. So he had phoned Sarah's parents.
Neil rang me and said, I've been trying to get in touch with Sarah. She's not answering her phone. And I thought, well, Sarah could be a bit scatterbrained. Either her phone would be out of charge or it'd be unplugged or she'd leave it in the car. So I tried to ring her a few times and then I thought, well, when Neil said he couldn't get hold of her, to be honest, I thought maybe she doesn't want to talk to you because it could be a bit intense.
She might have just been ignoring him to begin with, which she could do. So when I tried getting hold of my mum and she wasn't picking up her phone, I'd try through Facebook, texting, phoning some more, just any possible way out to get hold of her. Like tried her other phone, her work phone that she had, but nothing.
The following day, Ben reveals Sarah's still not returned home, and concern for her well-being starts to grow.
Messaged her again and tried WhatsApp, and then I thought, no, this is really, really odd.
I became quite worried because I just wanted to know if she was all right. It's my mum, like, it's the person who's brought me up for my entire life. I just wanted to know that she was okay.
After 48 hours and still no sign of Sarah, Ben decides it's time to call the police.
Kent Police switchboard.
Hello, I want to report a missing person.
Okay.
She hasn't gone missing before. She lives with me. She's my children's mum. She came home Tuesday night and then we all went to bed. And then when me and the kids woke up in the morning, she wasn't there. But her car's still outside.
On Thursday, the 11th of October, Ben Lacombe contacted us to report Sarah had gone missing. He told us that he'd come home from work. He said Sarah had come home just before 8 o'clock and she had gone to her room and she had settled herself into her room, which was on the first floor in their house. They stayed in separate rooms in that house. He told us that after putting the children to bed in the evening, he went to bed himself in the loft converted bedroom. And he said he went to sleep, had a full night's sleep. He'd woken up in the morning and found that Sarah's car was still at the address, but she was missing. After Sarah had been reported missing, officers attended the address and we began a missing person investigation.
Officers turned to Ben for help to piece together Sarah's last known movements, but he said he fully expected to see her the next morning, as it was a special occasion.
He wasn't expecting that Sarah would be gone. In fact, that day was one of their children's birthdays, and they had plans, and he'd expected her to be there.
Officers carry out a routine search of Sarah's bedroom and immediately notice something.
What we did find was that Sarah had left behind not only her car, but her car keys, her house keys, her purse, her cash, her bank cards, her handbag. In fact, everything that anybody could tell us that Sarah had was still at the address. Certainly, it looked like she'd gone out without any planning, leaving everything behind.
Concern was now growing.
There was no way she'd have gone out and left her keys behind.
The minute I'd realised that she'd left her handbag behind, with a purse, car keys, and so many other things that
bank
Sarah,
cards.
of all the people, would never have gone without any of those things.
For somebody that's gone missing, to have left all of those items behind was really strange and really concerning.
You just instinctively know that something's wrong, something's not right. Something's happened to her.
In the quiet suburban area of New Ash Green, concern is building over mum of 5, Sarah Wellgreen, who has been missing for 2 days. With her life seemingly looking up, a new job and a fiancé, police need to ascertain what would make her disappear. So establish a timeline of Sarah's last known movements on the 9th of October, the day she went missing.
It was a normal day for Sarah. She had taken her children to school that morning. She'd then gone out to meet some of her clients. She was a beauty therapist that used to meet some of her clients at their home addresses, so she went out and saw some of those people. And generally had what her family were telling us was a normal day. Sarah drove home and went into her home address. She'd settled herself into her bedroom. We know that she'd phoned her friend, and she was settled down for the night.
When she disappeared, the next morning there was contact between various people who knew her. It was agreed that if she didn't return that day or by the next day, that Ben Lacombe would telephone the police.
Kent Police Switchboard.
Hello, I want to report a missing person. She's my children's mum.
Concerned that her disappearance was out of character, police issue a missing person appeal to the public.
Well, I first became involved when we received a press release from the police initially about a missing person from New Ash Green. They said Sarah Wellgreen had gone missing. There were concerns for her welfare. We get so many cases of missing people that you're probably not too worried to start with. Half the time before you've written a story, file copy about a missing person, the police will send something out saying they've been found safe and well.
But there was something more pressing for the police. Sarah had left her car keys and purse at home, leaving only a couple of scenarios to consider.
We thought maybe she'd gone out for a run and hurt herself.
Has she had an accident somewhere? Has she gone out and had some kind of accident or some kind of medical episode, come to some harm where she can't raise the alarm herself?
With the first few hours of a missing person investigation being critical, police launch a search perimeter around Sarah's home.
They set up a 5-mile radius around New Ash Green for the search effort, scouring woodlands, fields, sheds, wherever anyone could look.
I think they've done all the right searches they could within the area, you know, woodland, scrubland, the mud flaps. They've done all the right checks.
Desperate to reach out to his mum, Lewis turns to social media, and the village community immediately rally round.
Lewis put a call out on Facebook one evening saying his mum was missing and had anybody seen her. And I was thinking, oh, you know, something needs to be done. So I phoned the pavilion. They said, yeah, we can meet people there. We put a shout out on Facebook.
I think the whole village answered the call, really. Yeah. Everyone turned out.
The response I got from the post on Facebook, it went quite far, very, very quickly. It was shared hundreds of times. It got all over social media so quickly. And then it got put into the papers and everything like that as well, just from one little post like that. There was hundreds of people that went. Most of the village in New Ash Green went, and from the surrounding areas went as well. It did give me hope that I would be able to see my mum again.
The search began with combining the efforts of the police and the community, the police leading it, of course.
We have walked and searched every piece of woodland, every field, every bit of grazing land.
There was a sort of lingering hope that she'd be found, you know, maybe she was injured or something, or, you know, something had happened, but she was okay, and that they would come across her. But the longer it went on, there was just no news at all about anything like that.
With no sighting of an injured Sarah within a 5-mile radius, police check her digital footprint for any clues into her whereabouts.
The police looked at her telephone evidence, they looked at billing data, they looked at banking evidence, all various sources of evidence, looking at hospitals to see whether or not there was any trace of her.
There was nothing, no footprint at all digitally of Sarah from that point onwards.
With Sarah seemingly having disappeared without a trace, detectives try to delve into her life.
We spoke to many people, her family, her friends, and other people in the community, people that Sarah had as clients. We were trying to build up that picture of Sarah. She was a happy person at the time. She had just secured a brand new job offer, which she'd accepted, which came with a fixed salary and a company car.
No doubt whatsoever that Sarah would disappear like that. She was so happy. We'd had a drink on the Friday, she was happy. She was full of life.
With all logical avenues as to Sarah's whereabouts exhausted, police start to suspect something more sinister has happened.
The days went by and we started to realise that something had probably gone wrong.
My suspicions became raised that something had come to cause Sarah some harm rather than Sarah having just taken herself away. I then was considering, well, who may have caused Sarah harm? Had Sarah gone out and met somebody that was pre-planned, and that person may have then caused Sarah harm? Had Sarah had somebody come to the address and he had taken her away?
But who would have done such a thing? Suddenly, everyone known to her is under scrutiny.
We actually had the police turn up at the house to see if she was there, and it's like, no, we, the ones who got someone to phone you, she's obviously not here. But obviously they've got to do their job, they've got to come around and check all addresses that she might be at, things like that. So I understand, but turning up to the address where me and my brother are living.
Despite searching multiple addresses of family and friends, there is no sign of Sarah. And when they speak to Ben again, he admits that despite playing happy families, there's more to Sarah than meets the eye.
He went on to say that Sarah's life is a bit strange. It was a bit weird. He said Sarah often would go missing, would often disappear, would go away without telling us, that actually she would go off and meet other people.
Suddenly, police are met with an endless list of suspects. Did Sarah secretly meet someone she knew that evening? Police begin to look closely at anyone Sarah might be romantically involved with, including fiancé Neil, one of the last people Sarah spoke to.
The police came round with a search van on the Friday. They were there for a couple of hours because we sat down and they were asking questions, chatting about lots of different things, lots of possibilities, everything like that.
Neil tells police that he had a brief conversation with Sarah on the night she went missing.
That night I phoned her at 24 minutes past 9. We had a 15-minute conversation and then we exchanged a couple of texts after that, which was normal, and then we said goodnight.
Detectives check his phone records and confirm these calls, but he still needs to prove he was at home in Surrey when he made the calls.
I had my daughter, who at the time was 3, overnight anyway, and so they knew I wouldn't take a 3-year-old all the way over to Kent around the M25. As I said to them, look, if that's any concern, then just check the M25 cameras.
Neil's story is quickly verified, so attention turns to other friends and acquaintances.
We had a lot of people involved in Sarah's life, and we did a significant amount of work to show how they could not have been there that evening. They could not have been with Sarah that evening. And in all of the evidence that we found around Sarah, through her messaging, through her contacts, through her phone, we had nothing to say that Sarah had made any plans that night to go anywhere. There was nothing to say that she'd gone out.
1 week into the investigation, and Sarah remains missing.
You struggle to take it all in to begin with. There's just so many people trying to get hold of you, message you to make sure you're okay. It's hard to explain in a way of how it sort of makes you feel, because you're a mixture between angry, upset, worried, and you just want to know where she is. That's all it is. You just want to know that she's okay.
The desperate search for Sarah intensifies. Police trawl CCTV cameras from neighbouring homes in the village on the day Sarah disappeared.
We captured on CCTV some footage that we were able to see from a neighbour's address. Sarah drove home and she parked her car outside her home around 5 to 8 in the evening on that Tuesday. She then went into her home address.
Police keep watching the CCTV, and suddenly all becomes clear.
And it was from that moment that he became a suspect for potentially harming Sarah.
In the quiet residential village of New Ash Green, the community is desperately waiting for news into the disappearance of Sarah Wellgreen, who vanished from her home the night before her young child's birthday. Ben Lacombe says Sarah returned home from work and both retired to their separate bedrooms. When he woke in the morning, she had gone. But a neighbour's CCTV camera reveals something unusual at 2 a.m. on the night of her disappearance.
The CCTV imagery demonstrated captures of a vehicle which was in all ways similar to the vehicle driven by Ben Lacombe, and it had, because it was a taxi, a distinctive logo on the driver's side of the door. And one of the captures, although it was very grainy in the night, had a blur consistent with that same logo.
With some expert commissioned work around the imagery that we've got and comparing that to the vehicle itself, we had very strong evidence to say that that footage was that vehicle.
Believing the vehicle to be Ben's taxi, detectives trawl CCTV and ANPR cameras in the neighbourhood in an attempt to follow the vehicle's movements.
This taxi had been caught on CCTV cameras going out of New Ash Green and down country lanes, going south and finally at Plaxdale Green Lane, at which point it had kind of disappeared.
And then a little while later on, there were captures of an almost identical vehicle travelling back the other way. And that was key because there was no vehicle that went out and back in that way.
So we now had Ben Lacombe's vehicle on the move between around 2 a.m. in the morning to around 4:30 a.m. in the morning, the night that Sarah had gone missing. So why was Ben Lacombe's vehicle moving for 2.5 hours or so that night when he said he was alone, asleep in his own bedroom all night?
Despite neighbours' CCTV capturing his vehicle return at 4:30 a.m, was it really Ben who was driving it the night Sarah vanished? Detectives rewind the footage to see if anyone else entered the property before Sarah arrived home.
Ben Lacombe told us that he'd come home from work. CCTV footage showed that he came home about 5:10 in the evening.
Detectives keep watching, but no one else is seen entering the property before Sarah arrives. But it was the neighbour's CCTV which flagged up another interesting detail.
Ben Lacombe had a sophisticated CCTV system installed at his own address.
From the neighbour's CCTV, we were able to see, going back and viewing 3 months' worth of footage, that the CCTV cameras on Ben Lacombe's house was on almost every single night running up to when Sarah went missing. And we know that because you can see the infrared lights of the cameras through the other footage to see when they're on and when they're switched off. So we know that after midnight, the cameras were switched off on Ben Lacombe's house.
With more and more discrepancies in Ben's account, police start to believe he knows more about Sarah's disappearance than he lets on, and start to piece together his movements.
We're able to show that when Ben Lacombe drove home from work the day that Sarah went missing, he'd passed some cameras and we could see that his car was spotlessly clean. The following morning after Sarah had gone missing, Ben Lacombe took the children to school, passing other CCTV cameras. Now that morning, the car is now dirty. There is mud up both sides of his car and around the tyres and the wheels of his car, but wasn't there when we saw him arrive home the day before. Around 10:30 that morning, he went to the office where his cab firm is that he worked for to see one of his colleagues. When we see it arrive outside that office, the car is spotlessly clean again.
It appears that on the night Sarah went missing, Ben Lacombe drove somewhere in his vehicle, resulting in it getting covered in mud. But there's a 2-hour window where the vehicle goes off radar. So where did he drive to? And where is Sarah? Having carried out some good old-fashioned detective work, and despite not having found a body, police make a decision.
So it was on the Monday, doing a formal review of what we had so far, that we moved the investigation from being a missing person investigation into the next day, when it became a homicide investigation.
They said they weren't going to do a television appeal, and I thought, they know something's happened. And Anya, you just know that you're not going to see her again. You know that.
Police believe Ben Lacombe murdered Sarah, but with no cause of death or clear motive, need to work harder than ever to build a case for an arrest. Phone records prove Sarah sent her final text at 10 p.m. Their home CCTV was switched off at midnight, giving Ben a 2-hour window in which police believe he killed Sarah, before putting her in his car and driving off.
The defendant having driven to some kind of deposition site, a grave where he had disposed of Sarah's body.
And then returned along the same route, where he's picked up again on CCTV. There was mud on his car the next day, which he had cleaned off promptly before going to the taxi office.
It was a pre-planned murder that Ben carried out. He killed Sarah. And myself and my team at the Major Crime Department, we instigated plans on that day to have Ben Lacombe arrested on suspicion of the murder of Sarah Welgreen.
Please, can you open the door, please? Morning. Morning. Go Bennett's, please. Just sit up first, chest hands a minute. Okay. Right, sit up first and let you wake up and I'll explain what's going to happen. The time is 6:45. You are further under arrest on suspicion of murder of Sarah Welgreen. This is a further arrest on the discovery of fresh evidence. This evidence provides inconsistencies with statements provided when you reported the missing. Your arrest is necessary to allow you to be questioned about the offence. Understand? Understand that? Okay, you don't have to say anything about harm defence. You mention and question anything later on in court. Anything you do say may be evidence.
When I found out that, he'd actually been arrested for murder, there's a feeling of anger, hurt, hate, all of the things that you'd associate with your partner being killed.
It's just a massive shock to the system. It's just unbelievable what goes through your mind. Now all the questions is, where is she? What did he do? How did he do it? Did she suffer? Was it quick? You just don't know the answers to it.
OK. So you are under arrest today on suspicion of the murder of your ex-partner. And I understand you still live in the same address, that's Sarah Welgreen. Now, as I say, you're here on suspicion of murdering her. We believe she may be dead, and that may be at your hand. So, did you kill her?
The pressure is on to find Sarah's body, establish a cause of death, and prove a motive to enable police to charge their suspect.
It was a vast operation, and one that has involved help from not only officers and staff from across Kent Police, but from across other forces nationally, using experts from the fire service, the marine unit searching water, searching confined spaces. We've searched around 1,400 different areas. We haven't found Sarah.
With searches proving fruitless and the clock ticking, detectives press Ben further.
So, I'm not clear at the moment, Ben, whether you're just trying to think of an answer or whether you've decided not to answer the question.
He remained utterly silent. He did not answer any of our questions. He did not give us any information. He stayed absolutely silent and stared at the floor through 7 hours worth of interviews.
After failing to answer any questions and despite no body being found, police charge Ben with the murder of Sarah Welgreen. But what really went on that night? And why did their once loving relationship end in such a tragedy? In a Kent village, the body of mum of 5, Sarah Welgreen, has still not been found, but police pursue a case of murder and have charged 38-year-old taxi driver Ben Lacombe.
It's hard to believe that it's happening to you. I know you see things like that, everything going on in the news and see it all in the newspapers and things like that all the time. You never think it will hit home, never, until one day it just turns up on your doorstep.
In September 2019, the trial into a no-body murder case begins at Woolwich Crown Court.
When you prosecute a case in which the body of the deceased has not been found, it presents unique challenges in the trial. And those challenges is to demonstrate that the defendant that you're prosecuting is responsible for killing the deceased.
The prosecution reveals to the court a conversation between Ben and police a few days before he was arrested.
We asked Ben Lacombe if we could take information from his mobile phone, and he said to us that actually he wouldn't give us his phone. It was very late. He wanted to go to sleep, and he would give us his phone the next day. As it turned out, and what we later captured on CCTV, was that Ben Lacombe didn't go to bed. He left the address. He travelled around and went into the Dartford and the Greenhithe area and parked up for a few minutes late at night near the River Thames.
There was CCTV footage of the defendant in the pouring rain, desperately trying to get rid of something. And the prosecution suggested that that was the defendant trying to get rid of his own telephone. We knew from other evidence that he had purchased a new telephone in the days that followed Sarah's disappearance. And he was obviously keen to get rid of his own telephone, a telephone which could have given the police an indication of his whereabouts on the night of the 9th of October.
The prosecution reveals further evidence linking Ben to murder.
Although the police didn't know exactly what had happened to Sarah's body, they knew that there had been a period of an hour and a half or so where that vehicle had disappeared. And it seemed likely that as part of the planning, Ben Lacombe had already chosen where it was he was going to dispose of Sarah's body. It may even have been that he had already dug her grave.
When we did a search of Sarah Wellgreen and Ben Lacombe's home, we found a very large shovel in his shed.
The defendant's account of why he needed a shovel of that type at his trial would later become that the shovel was there for his mother to use to tend to the flower beds at the front of his property. Well, on any view, the flower beds at the property didn't require a shovel of that size, and the explanation given just simply wasn't a credible reason for having a shovel of that type. But it was a shovel that was relatively new in its appearance and was consistent with the type of implement that someone would use to dig a grave quickly.
Despite presenting their evidence to court, police still have no obvious motive as to why Ben would kill the mother of his 3 children. But as the trial unfolds, more information about the couple and their relationship comes to light.
Ben Lacombe was born in Greenwich, grew up in Charlton. Early 2000s, he moved to Mallorca, where he was hoping to find work as an airline pilot, or trained as an airline pilot.
In December 2004, Ben met Sarah via an online dating site.
In the beginning, when Ben first met my mum, from what I could tell as a child, he was a nice bloke. From what me and Jack had seen, he was all right, he was nice. And everything seemed great, really, to begin with.
Desperate to create a stable home environment and provide her sons with a father figure and a better lifestyle, Sarah quit her job and moved to Mallorca to start over with Ben and her 2 sons.
Obviously, Sarah thought, oh, this is going to be a good life. You know, I really want to give this a try. And it did sound good.
But it became clear to the courtroom that their new life in the sun didn't work out as planned. Unable to speak the language, Sarah couldn't get a job and missed her family and friends back in the UK. Ben's dream to become an airline pilot failed to materialise, and instead he worked a low-paid airport job.
In the end, they moved back to England. By that point, they'd had their first child together, and they moved to New Ash Green.
The couple settled into village life. Sarah got a good job while Ben started working as a taxi driver. But cracks soon started to appear in their relationship.
They muddled along, arguing, bickering, fighting for months after that. And they finally split up. Sarah had made her mind up. She'd had enough.
But if Sarah thought splitting with Ben was going to be easy, she was mistaken. He threw her, Lewis and Jack out on the street, keeping their 3 youngest children inside the house with him.
I was angry with Ben, but that had been built up through a few months of just listening to the arguments and things like that, and then that just throwing us all out, it was just unfair on us, really. We had nowhere else to go.
The next morning, Ben already had a court hearing arranged, and he stated in court that Sarah abandoned her children. Could he have custody? And he was awarded custody. It was all pre-planned, and Sarah could not defend herself because she did not know what was happening.
Distraught that she no longer had access to her youngest 3 children, Sarah and her 2 eldest sons moved in with her mum and stepdad.
We were absolutely devastated. You see your child crying and you can't help them. And we literally scraped up everything we had to go and see a solicitor.
But things took a positive turn for Sarah in August 2016, when she was awarded full custody of the children. Not only that, she met boyfriend Neil. Despite this, Sarah was terrified that Ben would attempt to take the children away from her if she moved in with Neil. So she made an unlikely peace offering with Ben to raise their 3 children under the same roof.
Sarah wasn't happy about living with Ben. There was definitely animosity between the 2 of them. You know, they'd been together for a number of years. That didn't work out for various different reasons.
Yet Sarah had a plan: to buy Ben out of their 4-bedroom family home. And she soon secured a new job with a big enough pay rise to make this happen. And after arriving home from work on 9th October 2018, she tells Ben her plan.
Ultimately, Ben had lost control. The house was going to be put up for sale. He was going to lose his home, even though he was going to get half the equity.
And he'd lost not just, the property which he loved so much, but he'd lost control of the children.
When you look at Ben Lacombe, he would have been left with almost nothing.
Because he would have found himself in a position that Sarah was in not long before. And I think that probably pressured him into doing something stupid.
Ben was the only one that would have a motive for killing Sarah. Nobody else. Ben had everything to gain from getting Sarah out of the picture permanently.
After a gruelling 30-day trial at Woolwich Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Ben is found guilty of Sarah Welgreen's murder. He is sentenced to 27 years in prison.
"27 years for Ben Lacombe is not enough. Ben Lacombe should never see the light of day until he admits to those 5 children where he's put their mother. I've got one child who came home crying the other day because they wanted their mummy to pick them up from school one last time. So no, not enough.
The case of Sarah Welgreen is among a small number of convicted murder cases in the UK in which the victim's body has never been found. But the community has never given up hope of finding her.
We give the family hope that one day they will be able to find her, otherwise they've not got that hope to hold on to.
And that they know that we're still looking. And they know that we won't stop looking, don't they?
Not been forgotten.
No, that's all.
We would like closure. All of us would like closure. For the body to be disclosed, to have a proper funeral, would probably help us all put it to bed.
2 years on from her disappearance, Sarah's family are slowly coming to terms with life without her.
Ben's actions have caused me to lose my mum, for some of my siblings to lose their mother and their father at the exact same time. And it's just, it's an unthinkable thing. It really is. You never expect anything like this to ever happen to you, and you wouldn't wish it on the worst person. It's just a horrible, sunken feeling and just a hole in your heart that you'll never fill.
It is very raw. There's not a day goes by when you don't think about her, whether it's something that's played on the radio, or you see something, oh, Sarah would like that, or something the children say. Yeah, there is never a day goes by, and I don't think that will ever change for any of us.
And until she is found, the question remains, where is Sarah Wellgreen?
Investigate an infamous case stage by stage to appreciate the full picture in OJ Made in America, available now on Sky Documentaries.
Hot revenge of a brother for betrayal. I have always heard the expression, no one is perfect. If this is true, then I am normal. What I mean is that I am not perfect. My biggest flaw, which I keep under control, is the most serious. I like to start fires. When I was younger, it was a real problem, and that's how I got my nickname, Pyro Petey. My name is not Pete or Peter, but Robert Smith. It's one of the most common names in America, which can be both a blessing and a curse. However, let's get back to my nickname. My brother William baptized me when I was 12 years old. The name stuck for a long time, but as I learned to control my desires better, the pyro part disappeared, but everyone continued to call me Petey. Sometimes it was awkward when I had to explain that my real name was Robert. My second problem is an unusual reaction to beer. If I drink more than one beer, I fall asleep. If I manage to drink 2 or more, I completely black out for 10 to 12 hours. It was much easier to live with the beer problem than with pyromania. I didn't stop drinking completely, but I realized when, where, and how much I could drink. When I was 14, I spent a summer experimenting with my fire-starting skills. Several garages and outbuildings in the neighborhood fell victim to my experiments. Of course, I quickly realized that this was not something to share with friends or family. Luckily, I was young and sloppy, and I was quickly caught and put through the legal and psychological ringer. However, I never lost my interest in arson. I spent a lot of time researching and experimenting, but always without the risk of being caught or embarrassed. Apart from the usual challenges, growing up was not easy. My older brother William has always been the favorite and an excellent student. I had to struggle to keep my head above water, while he became an academic genius, a sports hero, and a killer of women. The fact that I was his younger brother did not hurt my ego. The happiest day of my life was the day he left for college, with a full scholarship, of course. As inept as I was, I managed to graduate from high school and get a job as a roofer. I actually liked my job. I think I had some kind of attention deficit disorder because it was hard for me to stay at any job for more than a few days. My choice of vocation helped me avoid this problem to some extent. I always started a new job and finished it before I lost interest in it. It was a pretty good combination. Over time, I was able to keep my disease under control. It took 10 years after graduation before I was able to meet a girl and build a relationship. A year later, I decided to propose to her. Sarah was almost perfect, as far as girls go. I wasn't that picky, but I really couldn't find any flaws in her. She had beautiful brown hair, a nice complexion, and a nice body. As soon as we were able to save enough money, we bought a small house to start a family. Everything was great until my brother William decided to come home to visit us. William graduated from college and got a job as an electrical engineer. He worked for one of the big chemical companies in North Carolina. I hadn't seen him in almost a decade and didn't really want to see him now. We all gathered at my mom and dad's house for a mini-family reunion. William had just returned home from the Poconos, where he had bought a house on 10 acres of wooded land. It looked more like a cabin in the photos. He was going to have an open house over Labor Day weekend and gave us detailed directions on how to get there. William's wife, Rachel, was in North Carolina with their 2 children. He really wanted us to meet her and the kids at the cabin later that summer. Things were going better than I expected, until I noticed that Sarah and William had become quite friendly. Now I expected my wife to be friendly, but the interaction with William was abnormal. She was flirting, and he was letting her. Suddenly, I remembered the reasons why I hated my brother. He was leaving the next day, so I didn't want to make a fuss. I was forcing myself to spend more time with my dad than I wanted to, just to avoid seeing Sarah and William together. We were about to go home when Sarah dropped a bombshell on me. She invited William to stay overnight in our guest bedroom. I could have killed her right then and there. It got even worse when she told me she was going to drive home with William because she had never driven a Mercedes. I knew it was a lie, but it didn't seem to matter anymore. I tried my best not to show my anger. I hadn't expected this from Sarah, but she had never dated William. He was handsome and could talk anyone into anything. Sarah spent way too much time showing him around the house and telling him how she was going to decorate every room. We were finally able to sit down and relax when Sarah brought over a couple of beers. I usually drink 2 or 3 beers a month, and only when I'm going to stay home and go straight to bed. William looked at us and smiled as he started to drink. Sarah had a glass of wine that she was breastfeeding. "Hey, we have a jar of those wonderful nuts in the pantry. Wait a minute, I'll get them." The nice thing about Heine's is that you can't see what's in the green bottle. The beer poured into the sink. I came back with a can of nuts and a bottle of tap water. Up to this point, I still continued to believe Sarah. We talked for about 20 minutes, and she showed up with 2 more Heineken. Now I knew that William and Sarah were up to no good. They both knew about my beer problem and seemed to be using it to their advantage. I don't know what William did or said to Sarah, and I don't even know when he did it. Maybe they planned it all out on the short drive home. It didn't really matter. I apologized and went to take a leak. The beer went down the toilet with my urine, and I came back with a full bottle of water. I noticed a smile on William's face as I took a big gulp. It just annoyed me, but when I saw Sarah smiling, I got angry. Usually after 2 beers, I fall asleep for the night. It was easy to pretend to be sleepy, and I even pretended to try to stay awake. I finished the water from the second bottle and slowly went to the kitchen. I put on a show, throwing away the empty bottle and opening the fridge to get a fresh one. When I returned with the 3rd bottle, William was grinning from ear to ear and Sarah was blushing. I quickly finished the water from the last bottle, closed my eyes, and started breathing heavily as if I had fallen asleep. My wife and brother were whispering quietly as they turned off the lights in the living room and walked down the hall to the bedroom. They both knew I would not sleep all night, dead to the world. I waited for 20 minutes and then went down to the bedroom. The door opened without any problems. The moonlight coming through the bedroom window made it easy to see my brother and my wife having sex on our bed. They had no idea I was watching them. The night was still young, and I had another 3 hours to go. I must say that William drew a good map. I had no trouble finding his hut in the woods. It was a beautiful place, and it cost him well over $250,000. 30 minutes later, I was driving home, and the cabin was a big orange ball in my rearview mirror. I was sitting on the street, away from the house, out of sight, just as the sun was rising. Suddenly, Sarah appeared in front of the front door. She looked around and, seeing that my truck was gone, hurried back into the house. 10 minutes later, William came running out, got into his precious Mercedes, and sped down the street. It was still early, so I went to IHOP for breakfast. Sarah started work at 8. At 10:10, our precious home and our savings went up in smoke. I stood by the truck, just for a moment to make sure it started, and then drove downtown to close our accounts. I managed to collect only a couple $1,000s. We weren't rich, and it took all our money to buy the house. When I got back to the house, the police and fire trucks were still everywhere. Sarah was there, talking to the police. I went to her Focus and put one of my special packages under the passenger seat. It was a mixture of gasoline and foam with a small lighter made from a remote-controlled car. I'm not sure, but I think Sarah saw me drive away when her precious little Ford went up in flames. My work here was done. Time to move on. I had never been to North Carolina before. It was beautiful, but I wouldn't want to live there. It took me 2 days to find William's house. Hell, his house was better than a shack. It had to be about 6,000 square feet with a 3-car garage. I had to park a few blocks away to get a look at the house. My old truck in that neighborhood would have aroused suspicion. I never saw William, but his wife, Rachel, took the 2 children outside to catch the school bus. After a while, she drove out of the garage in a Subaru Outback. It had a sticker advertising a local real estate company. I got to the house without any problems. You would think they would have a security system, but they didn't. No one would have dared to rob William. William wasn't home, but his Mercedes was in the garage, along with the nice little Harley Davidson. Actually, it was a big Harley. I quickly ran through the house to make sure it was empty and found that it wasn't. There was a cat litter box in the laundry room, but there was no kitten. I spent a few minutes searching and then decided to use a can opener. 10 seconds later, Tabby appeared, looking for a ding-dong. A few minutes later, he was comfortably ensconced in a cat carrier I found in the garage. Finding Old North Realtors was easy. I only had to ask for directions once. I walked in the front door and asked for Rachel Smith. After a while, she came out and I handed her the cat cage. She looked at the cat and then at me just for a moment. "Oh no, Petey, you didn't do this. Please tell me you didn't do this." We had never met, but she instantly recognized who I was. "I'm sorry. It was necessary. I didn't mean to hurt your cat." "Why, Petey, why? What was so bad that you burned down your own brother's house?" "Ask him. I'll call you in a week. If he doesn't tell you by then, I'll tell you." We were interrupted by an excited man who ran through the door. "Call the fire department. There's a car on fire in the parking lot. Hurry up." Rachel looked at me, but I just shrugged and turned away. On my way out, I heard the office secretary tell my sister-in-law that the fire department had already arrived at her house. At that point, I had satisfied my rage. I was still angry, but I no longer felt the urge to burn anything else. I headed west and then south. I spent a few days in North Alabama. There was a lot of roofing work that I found out was the result of several severe hailstorms in the area. The big problem was that all the roofers seemed to be Mexican. They worked in teams, and the quality of work was excellent. My hopes of finding any work seemed dim until I noticed an ad in the local newspaper looking for insurance roofing inspectors. I tried to clean up what I could with the little clothing I had on me. Apparently, that was enough because I got the job right away. They sent me to Mobile for 2 weeks of training, and then I became a full-time insurance adjuster for one of the largest companies. They had so many claims that I had enough work for at least 6 months. I had no problem using my own name and social security number. I'm sure a few law enforcement agencies were looking for me, but not in Alabama. I rented a small apartment and then sold my old truck. The insurance agency provided me with a vehicle along with extra money for gas and maintenance. I did my job and did it well. Everyone was happy. I kept my nose clean and stayed out of trouble. Shortly after I got settled, I called my brother's wife. She said that William claimed to have no idea what motivated me to set the fires. I promised that I would tell her what happened if William refused, but I decided to change my mind. I told her that since he refused to be honest with her, I would have to come back later. When I hung up, she sounded concerned. My new job made me clean up my appearance. I had to keep my hair trimmed and cut, and shave every day. These were self-care habits that I knew about, but never felt the need to follow. Perhaps that's why it took me so long to find a wife or a steady girlfriend. I usually ate dinner at fast food and sometimes at a restaurant. Lunch was always sporadic. Because I was the world's worst drunk, I avoided bars. About every month I would call home. My parents had no problem expressing their disappointment with what I was doing. I never gave any explanations or excuses at the time. Finally, about 6 months later, Sarah told them the true story. Because of the childhood relationship between me and William, they were sympathetic to the problem. William had suddenly fallen out of their good graces. My father confronted him, but he denied everything. Luckily for me, they believed Sarah. Sarah tried to find out where I was and what I intended to do with the marriage. She lived with her sister after the house burned down. That was the last time they mentioned her. In the conversations I had with my parents after that, it never came up about my brother or my wife. My parents knew that the only way I would continue to communicate with them was if they avoided these two topics. I did my job, and I did it well. Many local churches offered free English as a second language courses. I soon started attending these classes and learning Spanish. During this time, I made several friends. Some of them were roofers with whom I talked while working. There were also a few bricklayers, carpenters, and concrete workers. They worked until they broke a sweat during the day, but never missed their English classes at night. They joked about their children, who attended public schools and spoke flawless, accent-free English. The wives of many of them attended classes with them. My employer soon considered me bilingual. I never learned to speak real Spanish, but I had no problem holding a conversation with the workers. There was never any investigation into my arson attacks. I'm sure there were police reports, and my name was on every one of them, but no one ever looked for me. I used my own social security number on all my work documents, and even filed the proper federal income tax report. And nothing. Nothing. I was gone for about 2 years when my dad had a stroke. When I found out about it, he was at home but needed a lot of attention. My mom asked me if I could come home to see him. I couldn't say no. I took 2 weeks off from work and bought a used Focus, the same one that Sarah drove. It was cheap and got good gas mileage. After filling the trunk with some of my toys, I hit the road. I stayed at a motel 30 miles from home in case they were still looking for me. I spent the first day with my parents and got the news. William and Rachel had built a new house, bigger and more luxurious than the old one. Dad winked when Mom gave me their new address in case I wanted to send them a Christmas card. I think I have an ally. Sarah stopped calling and visiting. They hadn't heard from the police or insurance companies in over a year. They wanted me to stay in the house, but I insisted on going back to the motel. It was getting late when I left, but I decided to drive by Sarah's sister's house. I was sitting outside the house when a very large Dodge pickup truck with double wheels pulled up. The couple sitting in the cab kissed for a few minutes, and then my wife got out of the car and walked up to the house. The guy waited until she got to the door, which I thought was very tactful. She turned to him, smiled, and waved before entering. I was glad I had brought some toys with me. There was an all-night diner a few miles away, and it looked like my wife's new friend needed to get some refreshments. He parked in the middle of the parking lot so no one would hit his fancy truck. I parked on the side and walked over to fill up the Dodge at a special gas station. He took a booth near the front window and had just finished placing his order when I approached his table. "Is that your Hemi over there?" "Yes. Why?" "I just saw you come in. It's certainly a nice car. Do you mind if I sit down?" He just nodded, and I waved to the waitress. Something like this must be worth a lot of money. It was a comment, but I asked it as a question. The truck cost me $36, but I also got over $10 for the accessories. I never got his name, but for the next 20 minutes we talked about his truck. I had just had coffee, and he had the midnight breakfast special. "I don't want to sound nosy, but aren't you the one who's dating Sarah Smith?" "Yes. Do you know her?" "We went to school together. I thought she was married." This was another comment presented as a question. "She is, but he ran away a long time ago. The cops are after him for burning down his own house. Stupid asshole." "Why did he do it?" "All right, Sarah said he caught her hanging out with his brother. He burned down his house, too." "She admits to sleeping with his brother?" "Yes. She said that her husband didn't do it in the bedroom, so she had to look elsewhere. I'm helping her now." "That's cold. Why didn't she just divorce him?" "I don't know. I'll have to ask her. What's with all the questions, man?" "I'm just curious. Aren't you afraid he might find out about you and his wife?" "No. He's long gone, and if he came back, I'd beat the shit out of his cowardly ass." I smiled broadly, and he got a strange look on his face. "Wrong answer, dude." His eyes widened as I picked up the remote control and pressed a button. The homemade napalm instantly consumed the Dodge. He knocked over his chair as he sat up in surprise. "Say hello to my wife for me." No one saw me leave the diner because they were all staring at the big burning pile of metal in the parking lot in front of the house. I went back to the motel very carefully and decided to check out. 6 hours later, I was in North Carolina, looking at my brother's new house. I expected to see William go to work, the kids go to school, and then Rachel go to her office. But it didn't work out that way. Around the same time, several police cars and a security company van showed up. The garage door was open, and Rachel was busy loading the kids and a few bags into her new Volvo station wagon. She put the cat carrier in last. Someone warned my brother that I was riding a wave of success. I'm not stupid. I could do what I had to do another time. I quietly left the neighborhood and headed west toward the highway. Just outside of Knoxville, my cell phone rang. It was Rachel. "I know, Petey. I know now. He didn't tell me, but I figured it out. How did you do that?" "She called early this morning. She called and told William what you had done to her boyfriend, or rather his truck. Then everything became clear. William slept with Sarah, didn't he, Petey? That asshole slept with his own brother's wife.